the center of decision-making. We are a pillar of stability that allows an entire nation to move forward. We are the Central Bank of Chile, an autonomous, transparent, committed, and innovative public institution. We generate data, indicators, and statistics, the basis for providing accurate and timely information to understand economic phenomena and facilitate decision-making. We connect people with a more efficient and open economy. We are the heart that drives a country that trusts in its future. We know the power of information to understand the present and project the future. We incorporate new technologies to learn and open the doors to massive and diverse sources of information. We act responsibly, aware of the impact that data can have on people's quality of life. We are characterized by our technical rigor, reflected in the responsible use of reliable data, and an evidence-based approach to decision-making, while safeguarding confidentiality and upholding the ethical use of information. In our centenary year, the Statistic Conference reflects the central bank's commitment to Chile's economic development. Sixth Statistic Conference of the Central Bank of Chile, the power of data for a smart world. June 3rd and 4th in Santiago, Chile. Central Bank of Chile. Trust is central.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patricia Medrano. I work at the Statistics and Data Division of the bank, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Sixth Statistic Conference, The Power of Data for a Smart World. A very warm welcome to all our international guests, the board members, local authorities, and the general public who's joining us today, and those who are following us on the online streaming. We would like to remind our guests that part of the conference will be conducted in Spanish, therefore you might need the provided simultaneous interpretation equipment to hear the live translation. In this very special year, as we celebrate the centennial of our institution, it's a true honor on behalf of the Central Bank to host this important event. The theme of the conference, as we said, is the power of data for a smart world, because data plays a transformational role in our modern society, serving as the foundation for building a more efficient world. To officially kick off the event, we now invite our governor, Rosana Costa, for the welcome remarks.
Good morning and welcome to all our guests, international guests, members of the board, and all of you present here this morning attending this conference. It is an honor and it is a privilege to welcome you to the Sixth Statistic Conference of the Central Bank of Chile, which we are hosting in a particularly meaningful year for our institution as
Tal como dijo Patricia, ya que conmemoramos nuestro centenario. En los últimos 100 años, la evolución de la economía y de las estadísticas, en particular, ha estado enlazada con los entornos dinámicos y cambiantes y enfrentada a un futuro que avanza rápido y lleno de cambios tan prometedores como desafiantes. Esta sexta versión de la Conferencia Estadística, cuyo título El poder de los datos para un mundo inteligente, resuena con fuerza en este momento de nuestra historia. Si algo nos ha enseñado este último siglo, es que el conocimiento basado en información sólida y análisis riguroso guía el camino al progreso y a la estabilidad. Al mismo tiempo, abrimos una ventana a nuevos desarrollos que nos ofrecen oportunidades y desafíos. porque entregan herramientas, pero a la vez demandan más información de mejor calidad y de mayor oportunidad. En reconocimiento a estos 100 años, quiero recorrerlos desde la óptica de las estadísticas y desde ahí abrir las puertas al próximo centenario. El banco y las estadísticas. La elaboración y publicación de las estadísticas ha ido de la mano con el desarrollo institucional y la evolución económica y financiera de nuestro país, asimismo vinculadas con los acontecimientos mundiales. Desde al menos 3 décadas antes de su creación, en 1925, podemos encontrar un amplio debate en torno a disponer de un banco central que contribuyera a la estabilidad macroeconómica. A fines del siglo XIX, la inestabilidad económica y el sistema monetario frágil, cuya evidencia eran las frecuentes crisis bancarias y la casi ininterrumpida desvalorización del peso chileno, evidenciaban la necesidad de contar con una institucionalidad que otorgara estabilidad al país. Las significativas tensiones económicas y sociales derivaron en la promulgación de una nueva Carta Magna, la Constitución de 1925. En este contexto, la idea de un banco central autónomo, incluyendo su administración y sus vínculos con los poderes ejecutivo y legislativo, fue parte relevante del debate nacional. Desde su fundación, nuestro Banco Central reconoce la importancia de la información para la toma de decisiones y estableció una unidad especialmente dedicada a analizar y estudiar datos que pudieran darnos un análisis.
Conditions essential for the board at the time. In January 1928, the Central Bank of Chile began publishing its monthly bulletin. This publication that compiles national statistics continues to this day. Its first issue included figures on nitrate production, exchange rate, railway traffic, total amounts of checks processed in clearing houses, component of money, currency on deposits, and loans. These data reflected the Chilean economy of the time, characterized by a strong dependence on nitrate as the main export product and the driving force of domestic activity. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, Chile suffered a severe economic contraction due to the sharp decline in nitrate and copper exports, which weakened international reserves, public finances, and economic growth. The fiscal surplus in the late 1920s turned into a deficit in 1931. GDP plummeted, and a deflationary period unfolded, culminating in the abandonment of the gold standard and the suspension of external debt services. In this context, banking statistic, that is, loans, interest rate, currency in circulation, and bank reserves, foreign exchange statistics, fiscal data, foreign trade data, and international reserves gained importance. During the World War II, the Chilean economy faced external restrictions, rising inflation, and increased state intervention. The war disrupted international trade, negatively affecting exports, except for copper, which remained strong due to the demand for arms production. One of the main statistical innovations at the time was the systematic publication of the balance of payments, although its compilation began in 1930 by the General Directorate of Statistics. It was in 1943 that the Central Bank of Chile took an active role in its preparation, analysis, and dissemination. Toward the end of World War II, in 1944, the Bretton Woods Monetary and Financial Conference was held in the United States to design a new international financial system. This meeting led the creation of institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, now the World Bank Group. The IMF was tasked with promoting international monetary cooperation, supporting trade expansion and economic growth, and discouraging policies that could harm global macroeconomic stability and nations' welfare. The Bretton Woods Agreement required the central bank to submit a foreign exchange budget each November, which includes estimates in the foreign currency the country could use the following year to cover imports, capital accounts, liabilities, and other obligations or needs. This was first presented in 1946. The need for a common methodology to measure countries' economic activity led the United Nations to publish the first international standard for the system of national accounts. That was 1953. Chile adopted this system in 1967 with the creation of the National Account Department under the National Planning Office. This enabled the annual publication of statistics on gross national product, investment, consumption, and productive and institutional sectors. This new information marked a significant advancement in the availability of national macroeconomic data. The decades following the World War II were marked by central bank financing of the Treasury, which led to recurrent inflation problems and balance of payment crisis. The economic authorities of the time designed diverse and consecutive macroeconomic stabilization programs through price controls, including wages, and applied different exchange rate schemes without correcting the source of the imbalance. In this context, it became necessary to have balance of payments and monetary statistics. In the 1970s, the Bretton Woods Agreement were abandoned globally, which brought new challenges for the oversight of the international financial system. The collection of statistics now took place in a world of flexible exchange rates and increasing financial integration. Locally, in the early years of the decade, the Chilean economy was largely closed, facing significant macroeconomic and microeconomic imbalances, marked by substantial fiscal expansion that led to hyperinflation. In the second half of the 70s, Chile began a process of trade liberalization, gradually eliminating tariff barriers, reducing subsidies to domestic production, and dismantling exchange and price controls. In this new context, the central bank strengthened its role in statistic compilation, expanding foreign trade coverage through the publication of export and import statistics by product and by countries. This allowed for more precise analysis of trade flows and better monitoring of trade openness and the competitiveness of local industry. Monetary and financial statistics were also enhanced to reflect the incipient activities and operation emerging in the capital market, distinguishing between monetary and fixed income assets, and in the latter, identifying the various inflation-indexed instruments and their issuers. The 1980s marked a turning point. In July 1981, the central bank officially assumed responsibility for compiling the publishing of national accounts, which has previously been the responsibility of the government office. The bank thus established itself alongside the National Statistic Institute as one of the main institutions responsible for producing and disseminating Chile's macroeconomic statistics. The 1982 and 83 debt crisis had a profound impact on economic activity and employment, severely affecting the population's well-being. Its severity led to the suspension of the external debt payment, the collapse of nearly the entire domestic financial system, the imposition of capital controls, and the adoption of an adjustment program with the IMF to support economic stabilization. This program included fiscal and structural adjustment measures such as reducing the fiscal deficit, controlling inflation, imposing capital controls, and restructuring the financial system. This development demanded greater statistic transparency, particularly regarding external accounts. Thus, in 1983, the central bank began publishing external debt data disaggregated by maturity and counterparty. That same year, to enable more timely monitoring of the economy, the bank also launched the monthly Index of Economic Activity, a key tool for short-term economic analysis that continues to these days. In 1989, a milestone occurred that has shaped the history of our institution over the past 35 years. The enactment of the constitutional organic law which established the central bank's autonomous status. In this context, the bank's role was consolidated as the institution responsible for compiling and publishing the country's main macroeconomic statistic in a timely manner, including statistic of monetary and exchange rates, balance of payments, and national accounts. In line with international best practices, in 1992 and 1986, the 1986 input-output matrix was published. It was considered one of the most comprehensive in Latin America by its breakdowns. It was updated in 1996 and 2003. And since in 2008 has been calculated annually along with the publication of supply and use tables. Additionally, the bank updates the benchmark years every 5 years since 1996. The next benchmark revision for the 2023 will be published in March 2027. The globalization and increasing financial integration of Chile into the world economy during the 90s prompted the development of new statistics. Measuring external debt alone was no longer enough. It became necessary to include the international investment position, capturing investment made abroad at various domestic economic agents, with institutional investors playing an increasingly prominent role. Institutional strengthening and technological advances enable improvement in the frequency, coverage, and disaggregation of data, as well as the dissemination of new statistics areas since the second half of the 2000 years. In fact, to consolidate all macroeconomic statistic compilation and collection functions within the central bank, the Statistic Division was created in 2008. Likewise, we have gradually integrated into the international community, actively participating in organizations as the IMF and the BIS. Chile's admission to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 2010 further enhanced the quality and scope of macroeconomic statistics. This has involved adopting the highest international standard in data collection and dissemination, ensuring both the comparability and reliability of our statistics. AI, the regional level, we are also affiliated with the Center for Latin American Monetary Studies, CEMLA. Technological progress have paved the way for the statistics produced at the Central Bank of Chile to evolve continuously to meet the growing demand for information to support monetary and financial policy, as well as the needs of the Chilean society. In 2005, quarterly national accounts were introduced, followed in 2011 by the quarterly institutional sector accounts, integrating real and financial dimensions of the economy with greater frequency. The 2008 global financial crisis highlighted the need to improve transparency and oversight of derivatives markets. In Chile, this led to the development of integrated derivatives transaction information system, a centralized data repository to enable financial authorities to monitor systemic risk, identify cross-institutional exposures, and prevent liquidity crisis or contagion. In critical contexts, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the urgency of having more timely and detailed data became evident, enabling a deeper understanding of economic and social phenomena, as well as the heterogeneous impacts across different segments of society. In response, the bank, using microdata, increased both the frequency and timeline of its publications, along with the territorial and thematic disaggregation of data. These improvements have facilitated more agile and precise decision-making, especially in periods of heightened uncertainty. One example of this was the launch in mid-2022 of the quarterly regional publication and the development of experimental statistics, which provide more timely insights into the evolution of economic activity. Currently, we continue working to enhance the use of statistics and data. We are committed to producing statistics on household disposable income, consumption, and saving by income quintile, in line with international recommendations. Additionally, we are developing natural capital statistics within regional national accounts. We plan to include data on investment and foreign trade. In our commitment to serving society and making the bank's information more accessible, we have continuously innovated in how to publish and share our statistics in different formats and channels. In 2004, we launched the statistic database. Later, we introduced a mobile simplified version with an API to enable bulk data downloads and seamless integration with analytical and visualization tools. We also launched a regional app, improving access to this data. As part of this effort, in 2024, we also announced the first public call for researchers project using microdata, promoting academic collaboration. Statistics of the future. As we have seen, the bank has played a key role in providing information to society, guided by the principles of transparency, trust, and integrity. Our statistical work has evolved through the use of data and technology, the implementation of new methodologies, and the exploration of new data resources. As we cross the threshold of our centennial, it is time to envision the statistics of the future. As I mentioned earlier, economic and social events have historically driven the development of new statistics, as well as advances in computing led to more comprehensive, higher quality, and more timely statistics. A similar pattern can be expected going forward. However, the future also brings new challenges, given the availability of microdata, advances in artificial intelligence and quantum computing, and improvements in regulatory frameworks. Certainly, economic statistics are poised for a radical transformation. Asking ourselves what statistics and data might look like 100 years from now, is more than an interesting experiment. It is a compelling exercise. Some current aspects will only improve. For example, the immediacy with which we access information today suggests that in the future, every economic transaction could be recorded in real time, allowing us to instantly gauge economic activity. This could bring economists closer to their long-standing aspiration of detecting turning points in key variables as they happen. Likewise, data collection sources will multiply and historical series could be continuously updated, eliminating the need to wait years for final versions. The use of unstructured data captured from our digital devices, such as smartphones or smartwatches, could offer more accurate, timely, and cost-effective insights than traditional surveys. This could, among other things, facilitate the measurement of informality. Statistic portals, which currently allow users to collect information based on their needs, could evolve into platforms where users, by imputing their characteristics, would receive customized information powered by AI. Machines may communicate autonomously, potentially leading to previously unthinkable fields, such as the development of statistics for robots. The future is uncertain, but promising. However, these advances must be accompanied by regulation that ensure the appropriate use of data and protect privacy, placing the society's well-being at the center, promoting transparency, and ensuring the ethical use of information to strengthen public trust. In this rapidly evolving world, one that may reach unimaginable heights, our 2023-2027 strategic plan includes a key objective, that is to continue deepening the use and analysis of data across all areas of the institution. We aim to be at the frontier when major changes occur with a robust statistical system that respects individual and social rights. This will help the central bank to continue to fulfill its role as a guardian of macroeconomic stability in the decades to come. This conference, 2025, in it, our commitment to staying informed about innovation in statistics and data has been enduring. This led us to organize our first statistics conference in 2015, bringing together the interest of both compilers and users, aligned with the international agenda and our strong commitment to promoting, disseminating, and using statistics. Today, with pride, and after organizing 5 conferences, including one during the pandemic in 2021, with participation from experts at statistical officers and central banks at the forefront of knowledge, I can say that the Statistics Conference has become a regional benchmark event. This year's conference is an opportunity to reflect on the past, celebrate current achievements, and look to the future with determination. Over the next 2 days, we will explore successful experiments in the use of data and artificial intelligence for more informed and timely decision-making. We will use how data is being used to gain deeper insights into economic and social phenomena, anticipate trends, identify opportunities, and mitigate risks. I believe the discussion on how artificial intelligence is transforming decision-making will be of particular interest. In a world where information flows at unprecedented speed, organizations must know how to listen to their audiences and adapt to their needs. Moreover, in a landscape filled with multiple sources and indicators competing with traditional statistic ethics, privacy, and responsibility, both in data management and information dissemination are essential considerations. For this reason, we will explore how various institutions work to maintain credibility and strengthen public trust through effective communication. My final reflections. Since their earliest users, statistics have been and will continue to be essential for interpreting our reality, guiding research, and above all, enabling informed decision-making. In an increasingly interconnected and data-saturated world, their relevance not only endures but grows stronger. The role of central banks and statistical offices in providing the information needed to understand the economy and design evidence-based policies is more vital than ever. On the occasion of its centennial, the Central Bank of Chile reaffirms its commitment to producing relevant economic information, leveraging the growing analytical capabilities offered by granular data and artificial intelligence tools. A century of history has taught us that stability is built on solid foundation of knowledge and transparency. That crisis and abrupt changes in the environment are best addressed with timely, high-quality data and rigorous analysis, not improvisation or political pressure. That autonomy is not an end in itself, but a means to ensure technical decision focused on the well-being of citizens. We look to the future with the certainty that the power of data managed with responsibility, ethics, and vision will enable us to build a more prosperous and resilient world. Yet we face a number of complex and multifaceted challenges, such as designing strategies to manage and analyze large volumes of data while ensuring their reliability, accuracy, and confidentiality, and balancing data utility with privacy rights. As producers of statistics, we must maintain a constant commitment to learning and a willingness to think outside the box, to be creative, explore new methodologies, and strengthen communication and collaboration skills in an increasingly interdisciplinary world, all while meeting the growing demand for more accurate, rigorous, timely, and granular information. As for the limits we can reach, there are concepts today that remain only partially measurable, such as the well-being, which may become fully measurable one day in the future. This could represent a revolution in the way public policies are designed. Whether or not we reach the point, we must begin preparing now. The 6th Statistical Conference of the Central Bank of Chile represents a valuable opportunity to learn, share, and collaborate in addressing the new challenges we face as producers and users of statistics. We sincerely thank all the speakers and participants present for your valuable contribution to this event and for allowing us to share and learn from one another. We are confident that the discussions and presentation over the coming days will be of great value and inspiration in continuing to strengthen the fundamental role of statistics in our countries. I hope this conference proved productive and enriching for each one of you. Finally,
Data Officer and Director of the Statistics Department at the International Monetary Fund since August 2022 to deliver the keynote speech. Before joining the fund, he worked for 25 years at the Statistics Netherlands, where he held various expert management and directorial roles in the fields of methodology.
Económicas ambientales y fue presidente del Comité de Contabilidad Económica Ambiental por 7 años y también lideró las estadísticas en ese ámbito. Dentro de este sistema del Banco Central ha trabajado en los grupos de trabajo especializados. Fue miembro del equipo estadístico de la coalición de inteligencia artificial. Por favor, señor Bert Ross, le cedemos la palabra.
Does the microphone work?
Muy bien. Tengo acá el poder en mi mano, el poder de la presentación. Sí. Muchas gracias, Presidenta, por ese gran discurso de apertura y el apoyo a las estadísticas y los datos. Es un gran honor estar ante ustedes hablando de los datos y estadísticas, un tema que me apasiona. Los quiero felicitar en el centenario también del Banco Central de Chile, una institución muy prestigiosa a nivel internacional y que ha apoyado mucho la estadística y los datos y nos ha hecho todo esto posible. Hablaron de la cuarta conferencia en el 2021. Yo participé desde ella, estaba en el living de mi casa en Holanda, porque obviamente no podíamos estar en forma presencial. Fue una gran experiencia y ahora es también magnífico estar ante ustedes ya presencialmente. Para plantear lo obvio, que ya se ha planteado también, es que obviamente que los bancos centrales dependen de datos precisos y oportunos para poder cumplir con sus funciones principales que tienen que ver con la política monetaria, estabilidad financiera y la supervisión de los sistemas de pagos. Es necesario para la formulación de políticas y queda claro que este es un tema que hace que nuestro ámbito de estadísticas y datos se torne no solo interesante, sino que también muy importante. En cuanto a estadísticas y datos en los bancos centrales, nos enfocamos en las nuevas áreas de inteligencia artificial. Pues ahí eso se los plantearé. Voy a ver cuánto tiempo tengo para poder plantearles todos estos temas. Los bancos centrales son tanto productores como usuarios de los datos porque tenemos el rol de supervisores y fiscalizadores en cuanto a las reservas, la emisión de dinero también, y se requieren datos de alta calidad. Y aparte también, como tenemos que reportar a instituciones financieras con datos precisos y oportunos, nuestra labor hace más importante la entrega de estas estadísticas. Nosotros somos un espejo de la economía y esta es una lista que tenemos acá de las estadísticas que se utilizan y se elaboran en los bancos centrales, no siempre en algunos países, porque en algunos tienen institutos estadísticas como en Estados Unidos o en Noruega, pero como pasa en Chile con las cuentas nacionales que también se llevan en el Banco Central. Esto tiene que ser complementado con estadísticas como inflación, desempleo, datos fiscales del gobierno, que los plantea el Ministerio de Finanzas. Por lo tanto, en cuanto a la historia, yo creo que ustedes ya saben la evolución del Banco Central. El primer Banco Central fue el Banco de Suecia. Ellos necesitaban información de qué pasaba con la economía, pero no habían estadísticas formales en ese momento, eso vino más tarde. Por lo tanto, esto fue la base de, por decir así, todos los rumores económicos que se iban recopilando en una forma más formal. Y después empezaron las estadísticas formales a fines del siglo XIX con estadísticas de precios. Y el Banco de Chile, creo que fue en el 1928 que se unió a esto, o 1925, empezó a elaborar estadísticas oficiales. Y el Fondo Monetario Internacional fue establecido también en 1944, después en 1948 se empezó a producir estadísticas ya formales. Por lo tanto,
also, fan charts became in fashion, basically showing the uncertainty around estimates. The IMF introduced data dissemination standards. These are basically models to promote transparency. Transparency is really important of the economy. It builds trust in the public, policymakers, but also for the markets. And we have these tiers, EDDS, SEDS, SEDS Plus, that basically describe quality standards, how good and how transparent you are. Chile is SEDS Plus, the highest level. And these are really instrumental in promoting transparency and describing quality. Fast forward to this century, it's exciting. So much data is there. When I started statistics 30 years ago, not even more, 35 years ago, well, statistician was not the most sexy profession. Now we call data scientists, and we are. And this is basically the same job. I mean, there's information, and we need to make estimates and transform that in information. But now there's all this big data, the Internet of Things, the large volumes, not only digital data, but also images, satellite data, and many more things are possible. And especially COVID-19 was a drive for innovation, because especially then turning points were so important to detect. What's happening in the economy? Everyone was screaming for fast and quick information. On the other hand, surveys, household surveys were not possible. You could not go along the houses. So this was really a period where there was a lot of innovation and things started there. So I'll give more examples about that, also about granular data sets. Well, Remigio is in the audience. He will probably talk about the ECB. I think many countries in the world are jealous on the microdata that you have, but I think you'll talk about that later in your presentation. So we'll talk about microdata. No, not microdata, about big data and the new data sources, but also the traditional macroeconomic statistics are still very relevant and important. So that's the monetary and financial statistics. An example to the left, the balance sheet of the Central Bank of Chile. On the top, the assets, below the liabilities. Blue is international reserves, and orange is the claims on banks, other depository corporations. And in COVID times, you see the balance sheet expanded because of the special lending arrangement. And after COVID, that came down, and obviously there had to be some policy making to prevent inflation. So this is still a very important statistics, a traditional macroeconomic statistics produced. And so it's not only big data, it's also this kind of statistics. Financial soundness indicators giving information about stability. The example here is banking profitability, return on assets, and by making that for each country, making them international comparable, standardized data, countries can compare to each other, to groups like emerging markets, to advanced economies. And this is the kind of information that's also very useful in policy making. So these statistics that central banks make are not only interested for central banks themselves, but also for researchers, for investors, for analysts, and I think there are some of you here. Just some examples. FDI obviously is important for indirect investment, but not all FDI leads to economic activity, especially on SPEs, the special purpose entities. If it's invested in there, it's sometimes just for tax reasons, and it's important to split SPEs and non-SPE FDI from overall FDI. So I think you all know we publish new manuals, BPM and SNA, this year, and SPEs are giving much more prominence. There's a good definition now. The IMF started data collection starting last quarter of last year. I think we have 28 countries reporting now quarterly data on SPEs, and that will increase. So this is information very important also for
para saber qué está pasando en la economía. Por lo tanto, saber realmente qué es lo que está impulsando la actividad económica. Y los datos muy importantes tienen que ver con el COFER, que es la composición de las reservas de intercambio. Esto es muy importante. En los países el 10% ya ha sido adjudicado, pero para el 90% sí sabemos. Básicamente lo que podemos ver, por ejemplo, cuál es el efecto de la depreciación del dólar, por ejemplo. En el último trimestre de 2024 podemos ver que hay una desaceleración en las reservas, están disminuyendo las reservas. Esto nos da información sobre qué está pasando en el contexto político del mundo. Estas son estadísticas macroeconómicas tradicionales utilizadas por los bancos centrales, pero también por fuera. Y los microdatos, ya la presidenta lo mencionó, si tenemos macrodatos, describimos al país en general y la economía en su totalidad. Pero después podemos ver hacia dónde va la economía. Es importante saber también el desglose en cuanto a hogares, etcétera. Los macrodatos y microdatos son importantes. Lo que podemos ver es que cada vez más los bancos centrales están usando los macrodatos. La Reserva Federal está usando la información de tarjetas de crédito para ver qué pasa con el consumo, el gasto y también el estrés financiero en los hogares. Y también AnaCredit, que es datos a nivel de préstamo, nos muestra los préstamos individuales. Y viendo esa información podemos ver qué está pasando con la salud financiera de cada país. Estos son datos muy importantes, muy potentes, que van adquiriendo más valor.
Entonces, avancemos a la nueva era de los datos. La disponibilidad de datos está revolucionando la forma en que los bancos centrales y otros responsables políticos toman decisiones en un mundo cada vez más complejo e incierto. Entonces, hay más datos, diferentes tipos de datos, y esto lo podemos utilizar para hacer estadística. A mi modo de ver, estas estadísticas no es que vayan a reemplazar las estadísticas tradicionales, sino que las complementarán. O sea, hay muchos que dicen que lo tradicional puede ser reemplazado por los big data. Pueden utilizar web scraping para hacerlo. Y hay otros ejemplos también. Y más adelante en mi presentación daré ejemplos. Pero básicamente los big data da estimaciones oportunas, datos granulares y complementan las estadísticas tradicionales en base a las encuestas y censos. Entonces, ¿cuáles son las ventajas del Big Data? La oportunidad, información más oportuna. Aquí a la izquierda, la puntualidad o oportunidad. Y muchos países no tienen datos oportunos. Y hay mucho interés en cuanto a dónde va la economía. Y hay muchos indicadores ahí afuera que dicen a dónde va, y es muy bueno tener esta información en forma oportuna. Otro uso es la granularidad de los datos. Los tradicionales en las encuestas no son muy granulares, sería demasiado alto el costo. Y utilizan Big Data, pueden obtener desagregaciones muy detalladas. En este caso, como ven aquí, los empleos, vacantes, y ocupaciones como camioneros o lo que sea. Pero también hay datos no cuantitativos. Nosotros estamos trabajando en el clustering o agrupamiento. Por ejemplo, viendo informes y conectados, estados conectados al temor, por ejemplo, el pánico, riesgo de crisis, pueden ver los sentimientos, y esto afecta en la dirección de la economía. Estos datos son muy útiles. Bueno, nosotros en el FMI estamos muy orgullosos de esto. Este sistema lo desarrollamos, un sistema de identificación. Hay grandes naves, contenedores, los tanqueros, que todos transmiten señales, radioseñales, y cualquier señal da dirección, ubicación, la altura sobre el nivel del mar, etcétera. Y al seguir esto en tiempo real, uno puede ver qué están haciendo estas naves. Y en la Universidad de Oxford, nosotros mezclamos esto con comercio, con datos de comercio. Ustedes ya lo conocen. Y el 80% del comercio internacional de bienes se hace mediante el comercio marítimo. Por lo tanto, es una información muy buena sobre el comercio. Entonces, las cosas que se pueden hacer con esto. Aquí, el gráfico a la derecha es el canal de Suez, de información para los puertos. Cuántas embarcaciones entran y salen, 1.600 puertos, puntos, canal de Suez, Panamá, y pueden ver cómo va el comercio 7 días después del cierto periodo. Y aquí pueden ver en esta diapositiva cuando comenzó el problema, en octubre-noviembre de 2024, en el Mar Rojo. Y el comercio bajó dramáticamente por el canal de Suez y el del otro subió. Y aquí ven el problema con la sequía en el canal de Panamá, en que se bloqueó todo el tráfico. Pero bueno, además de seguir los shocks y ver lo que estaba pasando, también uno puede ver escenarios, porque todas estas cosas están vinculadas entre los puertos y hay todo tipo de escenarios de clima o alteraciones en los puertos en Asia, o qué implica eso para el comercio en otras partes del mundo, etcétera, en forma simultánea. Y entonces monitoreamos el comercio, básicamente a una semana de distancia, y ahí pueden ver cómo se ha ido desarrollando el comercio, especialmente en estas áreas. Es muy interesante mirar esto de cerca. Esto recibe mucha atención en los periódicos, pero, por ejemplo, esto es otro ejemplo. Las estadísticas oficiales, un país como Somalia hace estadísticas oficiales utilizando esta herramienta. Bien, todos mis ejemplos son una mezcla de cosas completadas, en progreso o planificado. El anterior estaba completo, pero este está en proceso. ¿Cuál es la información adicional que nosotros tenemos? A la derecha vemos los datos sobre la luz nocturna, de cuántas luces hay a la noche. Y frecuentemente esto indica el grado de urbanización, inversión en infraestructura, también mallas eléctricas o indicación de zonas rurales que son convertidas en zonas más urbanas, la expansión urbana. Y términos de búsqueda. Por ejemplo, el turismo es un buen ejemplo, muy importante. Si monitorean las búsquedas de ciertos términos, turismo, etcétera, pueden tener una imagen de hacia dónde se va el turismo en la economía. Y las exportaciones de diamantes, por ejemplo, y ven que hay 2 países principales de importación, y esto también les da ahí mucha información. Y también el transporte para el comercio informal. Entonces, todo esto junto les da una proyección o un pronóstico, si es que quieren, del PIB. Esta es un área en curso, pero claramente es algo donde se pueden ganar mucho con los datos. Bueno, esto también está en progreso o en curso. Y esto lo estamos haciendo con la comunidad geoespacial. Él estuvo el año pasado en México y y hay cada vez más colaboración con esta comunidad geoespacial. Si los riesgos son importantes para ver la estabilidad financiera, y lo que hacemos aquí en esta plataforma de difusión es hacer una plataforma geoespacial muy granular, América del Sur, y mapeamos los riesgos de inundación por los ríos y las cosas que nos llevan a la exposición de la población, pero se podría hacer lo mismo para el PIB Y combinándolo, uno tiene una visión de cuáles serían los riesgos hacia adelante. Siempre se ve en 100 años la probabilidad de inundación, 1%, pero si esto fuera ocurrir, cuál sería la exposición, etcétera. Y luego, esfuerzos de adaptación y también análisis de riesgo. Y se ve, el Banco Central Europeo ha hecho un trabajo maravilloso trayendo esto al mundo, estudio aún en curso, y eso se puede vincular a los créditos bancarios y préstamos. Entonces, esto es lo que estamos haciendo. Y cuando digo nosotros, me refiero a no solamente el FMI, sino que todo lo que estamos haciendo es en realidad en colaboración con muchísimas instituciones internacionales. Ven a Bruno aquí del Banco Internacional de Pagos, mucha colaboración. Y esto fue gatillado por el DTCAP, que junto con el FMI, el Banco BIS y las Naciones Unidas y muchos otros y las economías del G20 para desarrollar, o mejor dicho, rellenar las brechas en los datos. Y esto es parte de esta iniciativa. Y tenemos la semana que viene o la próxima una reunión en Sudáfrica. Y esto será un tema. Y cuando digo nosotros, no solamente el FMI, sino que también estamos trabajando juntos con otros. Bien, esto es Bolivia. Es un ejemplo del riesgo físico de inundación para la población y para el PIB. Esto es un ejemplo del análisis de texto y el análisis del mercado laboral. Si hacen encuestas, pueden preguntar cuáles son las vacantes o preguntarle a las empresas que están buscando. Pero nosotros en el FMI vinculamos los datos. Y se puede utilizar esto para analizar las tendencias en el empleo, el tipo de empleos verdes que están entrando en el enfoque y ver qué tipo de capacidades se requerirían para poder cumplir. Que los estudiantes tengan las habilidades necesarias, especialmente en los mercados emergentes. Entonces, esto es mucho más bajo de lo que yo hubiera pensado. Yo supongo que va a aumentar mucho en el tiempo. Pero también, claramente, esto es una limitación, una imitación del Big Data. No todo el mundo lo use. Y cuando uno analiza los vínculos entre estos datos, y hay que ver, asegurarse de que sea una población específica y no de todo el país.
10 minutes. Okay, I'll speed up a little bit, so I'll choose a little bit.
Me quedan 10 minutos, por lo tanto me voy a acelerar un poco. Otros ejemplos del texto para el monitoreo en tiempo real. Hay muchos indicadores que se utilizan y el índice de la incertidumbre mundial, informes y también el índice de estrés financiero, los informes existentes vinculados a, por ejemplo, el estrés financiero, los créditos. Y si cuentan el número de palabras y se hace un seguimiento del tiempo, ven que esto indica una tendencia o del aumento de estrés a nivel mundial. Esta información se utiliza porque es un indicador de la dirección que va a tomar la economía. Y creo que si cliquean aquí, pueden ver en dónde se está utilizando esta información. Muy buen indicador. Los criptos. Esto realmente está en desarrollo. Es muy importante. Necesitan saber como reguladores qué está pasando, como flujos de capital, salientes de capital. Y hay que encontrar una forma de obtener los datos. El GAP Initiative. Los problemas es que no siempre son marcos regulatorios, no hay un solo tema, sino que debemos confiarnos en la recopilación de datos, de los intercambios de cripto y otros. Y hay un gran mucha información sobre lo que se ha hecho exactamente. Pero igual no está fácil saber de dónde obtener los datos. Hay proveedores comerciales que lo están haciendo también, viendo los datos de texto que se está haciendo en Brasil, y viendo los contratos de divisas y cuántos criptos se están comprando.
And there in Brazil you see it's really going up. Cross-border crypto outflows means you buy cryptos and you send out money, and it's really going up, and we need to work on this because it's really relevant information. At the IMF we introduced the Big Data Center, and basically this is supposed to be a center of excellence. It's only 7 people, so we cannot do big data for the whole world, and that's not the idea. But they're good people, they have a lot of knowledge. So we give courses. We did one in Mauritius last week, Kigali earlier. We'll do one in Paraguay, in China, in Vienna, other places. We also bring in this knowledge in our technical assistance work. For example, the Sportswitch tool, we're helping countries to use it. We produce our own products, the ones that I showed before, but we really also want cooperation with other institutions to together see what all these exciting new data sources and AI techniques can bring us, and how we can help that. So this is not meant to do the big data for the whole world. It's meant to be a center of excellence, working together, cooperation, and see how we can do. So what more is the IMF doing? Well, we're a global institution, and we're helping shape the future of economic data governance by improving the quality of data and the processes that make it accessible, interoperable, and policy ready. I guess almost all in this room have...
Supongo que todos aquí han contribuido a esto. Están los manuales. Y creo que es un complemento para toda la comunidad estadística de que podemos asumir esto.
Los manuales antiguos tenían 17 años de antigüedad y los datos oficiales como el PIB y otros datos estaban basados en esos manuales que eran muy antiguos, y esos manuales, ustedes pueden ver que la palabra Internet no aparece, la digital aparece 2 veces, por lo tanto quiere decir que no estaban actualizados y necesitamos cambiarlos. Después de años de trabajo, muchos cambios se realizaron y ahora podemos enorgullecernos de lo que ha pasado. La implementación de todos estos datos va a ser dentro de unos 4 años. También estamos trabajando en nuevos manuales que van a estar listos en los próximos años. Vamos a tener un conjunto de manuales metodológicos que van a darle o poner en valor todos estos datos nuevos. Como dijo la presidenta, es fantástico tener datos, pero esta tiene que ser confiable, la calidad debe ser alta, tiene que haber sido recopilada de forma ética. La calidad es sumamente importante y la calidad significaba algo distinto hace 20 años. Por lo tanto, ahora estamos trabajando en una evaluación de calidad nueva, como por ejemplo lo que se está haciendo, y va a servir de base para normas, auditorías. Ahora en 10 países de África estamos viendo la aplicación de estos marcos nuevos para ver cómo va toda la metodología en sesiones que tenemos, también investigación, análisis en realidad que hacemos, y todos los avances van siendo integrados en esta evaluación de calidad. En Chile también, como pasó en Chile ahora también en el Fondo Monetario Internacional, tenemos un nuevo portal que tiene toda la información en un solo lugar. Antes, obviamente esto no pasaba, ahora los datos están muy bien descritos, los megadatos son bien consecuentes, bien coherentes, es una ventanilla única, es muy importante. Y hablamos de la comunicación, y también mañana se va a plantear este tema. También contamos historias acerca de nuestros datos. y mostrar cómo se utilizan. Uno de los ejemplos es que esto hace que nuestros datos estén listos para la inteligencia artificial, porque así usamos datos abiertos y podemos acceder o dar acceso a las herramientas de inteligencia artificial. Obviamente que los datos tienen que ser ubicables y todo debe estar muy bien definido. Debe haber datos con descripción de metadatos muy claros, SDMX, los estándares internacionales. Por lo tanto, estamos ayudando a muchos países a actualizarse para estar listos para la inteligencia artificial, y esto va a ayudar tanto como nos ayudó en el Fondo Monetario, y también va a entregar herramientas. Hay algo que nos enorgullece también, son 2 herramientas de inteligencia artificial. Algunos de ustedes ya las han puesto a prueba. La primera se llama StatsGPT. Eso es un guiño a ChatGPT. No estamos seguros que vaya a ser la versión final, pero uno le pregunta, por ejemplo, le plantea una pregunta, no decimos por favor, bueno, no tiene que decir por favor, pero uno está acostumbrado, y que nos dé tal información para los últimos años, para todos los países, y en cuestión de segundos nos da la información en los últimos 5 años. Y vemos cuán plausible todo eso y cuando uno empieza a ver, los datos están todos equivocados, y eso es porque hacen análisis probabilísticos, y eso es sumamente peligroso, porque en el futuro no sé si todo el mundo va a ir a analizar las bases de datos individuales. Creo que la mayoría de las personas van a usar estos tipos de herramientas de GPT para hacerlo. Tenemos que encontrar una forma de difundir nuestra información. Es por eso que hemos realizado esta herramienta StatsGPT. Por ejemplo, si hay una crisis financiera en Finlandia, si los precios están aumentando en Bangladesh, uno puede preguntar cualquier cosa y básicamente se abre un diálogo y nos da una consulta. En vez de darnos una respuesta, nos da una consulta sobre un conjunto de datos en el que confiamos. Y así uno puede quizás no obtener siempre la respuesta, pero por lo menos nos va a tener una respuesta incorrecta. Hay gente fuera del Fondo Monetario también lo ha puesto a prueba, muchos de ustedes también, pero pensamos lanzarlo después del otoño. Va a ser muy importante. Obviamente estamos trabajando con las empresas tecnológicas para ver si están haciendo algo que sea comparable y algo que ya exista. Tengo que ir acelerando un poco, pero ese es el tema. Estamos esperando poder pasar ya a producción con estas 2 herramientas. 2 manuals. Porque cuando se trata de elaborar el manual del SNA es de 225, el BPA de 1000. No sé si alguien ha logrado leer todo ese contenido. Por lo tanto, es sumamente difícil lograr comprender todo lo que está en estos manuales. Y es difícil para países pequeños. Por lo tanto, este Talk to Manuals es una herramienta en la que se pueden hacer preguntas, por ejemplo, como planteamos el tema de las reservas de oro, o por ejemplo, la producción. Se pueden hacer preguntas metodológicas y lo que hace es que da una respuesta. Es simplemente un LLM. Lo que hace es que nos lleva al manual en donde está la respuesta, donde uno puede leer la respuesta por sí mismo. Y esto es muy importante para poder ayudar a los compiladores de información, especialmente en circunstancias difíciles. Están todos los manuales ahí, los antiguos también, y ayuda a los usuarios a entender los datos de mejor manera. Esto ya está listo también. Si alguien lo quiere ver después me pueden pedir, se los muestro. Las asociaciones público-privadas tienen una gran importancia. Este es son alianzas que nos ayudan mucho. Por ejemplo, la OCDE, el Banco Europeo y muchos más, el Banco Mundial, para acceder a datos privados. Esta es una alianza, por ejemplo, entre empresas privadas y otras instituciones en donde tenemos un marco para acceder a información privada, empresas como Google, Microsoft, y está LinkedIn. Y hay obviamente un marco de derechos de autor y de acceso a los usuarios y también una arquitectura segura de TI. Nosotros no pagamos por los datos. Las empresas son las que deciden qué datos entregar, pero hay un marco para poder hacer esto de forma segura y esto puede ser replicado, creo yo, a muchos niveles. Los macrodatos y microdatos, obviamente llevando al compaginarla, asociarla, identificarla, esto se transforma en un gran recurso para entender de mejor manera qué está pasando en el mercado y hacer nuestros análisis. Por lo tanto, el Fondo Monetario también quiere tener acceso a estos datos. Pero estos datos obviamente son muy sensibles y tenemos que ver los temas éticos y de privacidad. Por lo tanto, cosas que estamos haciendo es ver un acceso seguro. Y una de las cosas más prometedoras es algo que se llama Remote Code Execution, que es en donde se envía una consulta a esta plataforma, se ejecuta el código y a partir de ahí se puede tener acceso a la información. Así no se tiene acceso directo a la información confidencial, pero sí se puede hacer el análisis de igual manera. A veces, obviamente, tenemos salas seguras en donde se puede ver esta información. Es un campo muy prometedor para el encriptado, por ejemplo, muchas técnicas que nos pueden dar acceso a datos, aumentando la potencia de nuestros computadores, accediendo a microdatos. Esto tiene que ser ético, bien hecho, pero es tan enriquecedor y tan prometedor. Hay una conferencia en Colombia que está mostrando esos resultados. Y después tenemos esta iniciativa que se va a presentar en Sudáfrica, en donde vamos a ver la evaluación de todo el tema de dimensiones legales, la tecnología, el tema de gobernanza, qué pasa con el acceso de datos y el compartir datos. Así se puede hacer una comparación de cada país con un punto de referencia para mejorar y hacer las cosas mejores. Por lo tanto, esta herramienta va a ser compartida. Mi última diapositiva. Bueno, los datos están en el centro de la formulación de políticas bancarias. Y por eso me gustó mucho que se planteara eso. Si el liderazgo lo entiende, eso hace muy fácil el trabajo de los estadísticos. Como organización internacional, el Fondo Monetario está promoviendo la innovación, la está haciendo posible a través de Portwatch, GDP, por ejemplo, StatGPT y las otras herramientas que les mostré. La privacidad obviamente es muy importante en todo esto. Y tenemos que hacer alianzas público-privadas, lo cual no siempre es fácil, pero sí vale la pena. Entonces, un llamado a la acción para construir un ecosistema de datos listos, modernos, interoperable, en conjunto. Gracias. Muchas gracias por esa presentación tan abarcadora y entretenida que va a dar lugar a muchas conversaciones durante el día. Y ahora voy a presentarles el programa para el resto del día con un video corto, programa del día 1. Tenemos la sesión 1, data para decisiones cruciales. El almuerzo. Sesión 2, indicadores nuevos y mejorados. Vamos a tener una pausa. después de eso, la sesión 3, cómo escuchamos a nuestras audiencias, a nuestros públicos. Y en el día 1 tenemos la sesión de datos para las decisiones cruciales, como les dije, y el resto del programa. Ahora los invitamos a un café. Les pedimos que estén de vuelta a las 11. Invitamos a todos los expositores e invitados internacionales para la foto que se va a hacer acá afuera.
el canal inglés. 1, 2, 3, probando traducción simultánea acá en el salón.
Ya, Pancho, partamos con... Oh, que está fuerte. No. Pancho, partamos con el español, por favor. Ya, en el inglés.
Ok, me cambia al inglés, entonces estoy hablando en el inglés. En este momento, canal inglés. Canal inglés. Inglés. Seguimos en el inglés. Seguimos en el canal inglés. Inglés. Canal inglés en este momento. Probando inglés. Canal inglés, no puedo más. Sería gritar. No. Inglés, inglés, inglés. Pero yo lo estoy escuchando igual en el YouTube. Canal inglés. Ya. Español, 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 español. Español, 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 español. 1, 2, 3, probando canal en español. 1, 2, 3, probando canal en español. Ok.
¿Te llega bien el español ahí? ¿Ah?
¿Me llega bien?
Ya, vamos a ver al inglés.
Acá.
Vamos a ver al inglés.
Ah, mira, ahí me lo...
¿Es
Llegó
español?
recién. Español.
¿Escucha bien?
Sí, lo escucho.
Ya, volvamos al inglés. Pancho, vamos a volver al inglés para estar tranquilos que el inglés está bien ahora también.
Ah, enseguida. Déjame...
¿Cartel que volvemos a las 11?
Sí.
Ya, no hay problema.
Que sale, ahora sale como... Sí. Ya,
Gracias.
¿La podía editar ahí?
Al tiro viene y el... Tienes que hablar si es inglés o...
Pancho, vamos al inglés. ¿Estáis por inglés o no?
Esa imagen está... Ah, eso es que la tienes tú.
¿Inglés?
Sí, estoy en inglés. Esa gráfica la tienes tú.
Sí.
Ah, ya. Sí, la tienes.
¿Y cómo la podemos cambiar?
¿Esa la quiere ver acá también? No, solo acá.
Solo allá.
Ah, ya.
Pancho, ¿estáis hablando?
No, pues eso nunca lo hemos tenido. ¿Cómo la modificamos? ¿La podéis pasar para acá?
Él la puede modificar acá también.
¿En cuál estamos, Pancho? ¿No estamos en inglés? ¿Por qué me habláis? Ya, pero ¿qué es español, Pancho? No me confundas. Ya, ¿estáis en inglés? Habla, habla, habla. Ya.
Cuando puedas, pásame esa gráfica. No, aquí lo estoy monitorizando y no...
No, Pancho, falta mucho, falta mucho. No estamos para nada. ¿No te llega el...? No, que llega uno, se va al otro, llega uno, se va al otro. Pancho, ¿estás hablando en inglés? Ya, pues, Pancho, por favor. Es que, weón, Pancho, necesitamos arreglar esto. Es que Pancho, yo no te estoy escuchando todo el rato, estoy configurando, entonces te dejo de escuchar, ¿cachai?
Que se ponga la Sara a hablar mejor allá en el micrófono, ¿o no? La Sandra, ¿dónde está el Pancho? ¿No hay ningún otro? Ya voy por abajo. Pero afuera, en las mesitas ahí.
Espérate, Pancho, pausa.
a partir con la sesión 1, datos para decisiones cruciales. Tenemos 4 distinguidos académicos sobre los temas que vamos a abordar hoy, por lo tanto es un gusto tenerlos a todos aquí. Vamos a seguir el siguiente orden, 20-25 minutos para cada orador y luego al final preguntas. Entonces, la primera presentación es de Vincent Bignon, investigador consultor senior del Banco de Francia, y quien hablará sobre las estadísticas monetarias y financieras históricas para responsables de formular políticas hacia un marco unificado. Muchas gracias, es un placer estar aquí hoy para presentarles lo que creo que es un trabajo que estamos haciendo en el BIS, en el grupo de Claudio Pollo y ahora coordinado por otros en la sala. Estoy trabajando en el Banco de Francia y en el grupo de estadísticas. Es una red, en realidad, de bancos centrales que apuntan a proponer metodologías y servicios de datos sobre datos históricos. Y esto es particularmente importante. Y para entonces tomaré 2 ejemplos a fin de informar a los formuladores de política. Los datos granulares son particularmente importantes para, en una dimensión, siguiendo, digamos, una decisión de política. Y luego queremos datos en tiempo real granular para hacerle un seguimiento. Y lo que nosotros vamos a defender, desde mi punto de vista, es que los datos históricos son importantes simplemente antes de que el formulador de política tiene que tomar su decisión. Y los datos históricos pueden ser un punto de vista muy importante para informar la formulación de políticas. Y este es mi punto. Entonces, voy a avanzar en una lámina. Sí. Entonces, ¿qué tenemos? Esto es un grupo. El HMFS es un grupo de estadísticas bajo el auspicio del BIS, y que es un grupo que existe desde el año 2016. Y lo primero que hemos producido es este paper. Tiene unas 20 páginas y es un llamado para cooperación entre los estadísticos y los historiadores, porque en algunas de las series históricas, los estadísticos son también parte del conocimiento sobre cómo se generan y cómo se difunden estos datos. Y debemos informar lo que se ha hecho a nivel académico en términos del agregado y la tasa de interés y de crédito, tasas de interés y el índice de precios de las propiedades. Y vamos a delinear una metodología a fin de producir este tipo de series. Y ahora hay un tema en cuanto a cómo se producen. Y es la segunda parte de mi presentación. Hay un mapa rutero que propone este paper de trabajo, de discusión, y este mapa funciona con datos originales en nuestros archivos, o sea, que el público fuera del Banco Central, que sean investigadores o economistas dentro del banco, pueden trabajar con los datos más apropiados para las decisiones que deben tomar antes de formular las políticas. Y el primer paso que ya hemos publicado, y que sabemos que en el grupo de BIS ya lo publicó, es un grupo que son temas en cuanto a las probabilidades a lo largo del tiempo. Y es una producción pública del grupo. Y ahora vamos a hablar acerca cómo los historiadores y los estadísticos están cooperando, interactuando. Entonces, este debate académico, y esto se está explicado en un paper de Reinhardt y Rogoff, Schularik, en términos del ratio del PIB. Y también hay trabajos diferenciales hechos por otros sobre los booms crediticios, las alzas y las bajas. La política monetaria, como acabo de decir, elegibilidad para el Banco Central y las crisis y las políticas de los bancos centrales para lidiar con estas crisis financieras. Bueno, cada vez hay más papers que utilizan datos históricos en el mundo académico y estas publicaciones. Son series. Y hablando con mis colegas, mi oficial senior en el banco, dicen que se puede inferir mucho con este tipo de papers. Y el de Shrek es uno de los de mayor influencia. Yo no soy estadístico por formación, sino que por trabajo. Y una cosa importante es que nosotros, como personas que producen o publican las estadísticas, debemos cuestionar o afirmar la calidad de las encuestas utilizadas y que son utilizadas por el mundo académico. Entonces, ellos no están ahí para hacer las encuestas, sino que para hacer la investigación, utilizando las series. También hay una dimensión que esto informa la formulación de políticas. Primero, debemos presentar los sesgos que cualquiera de nosotros tiene. Y esto es particularmente importante, especialmente para los formuladores de política, los funcionarios senior. Y también nos da una mejor apreciación de lo que es excepcional. Aquí hay varios ejemplos. Primero, acerca de la política monetaria. El segundo, la política macroprudencial. Entonces, esta serie que juzga los tiempos normales versus los excepcionales. O sea, los activos o pasivos totales del PIB de Francia desde la creación del Banco de Francia. Y lo que pueden ver aquí es que a la derecha claramente hay un pic de la serie, como el 80% del PIB. La operación de política monetaria del Banco de Francia. Y básicamente la política monetaria durante el COVID, el 80%. No tiene precedente esto durante el COVID. Hubo dos pics adicionales. El primero, el 100%, que es la Segunda Guerra Mundial. La Segunda Guerra Mundial fue especialmente particular. Y el financiamiento monetario del Estado. Y el segundo, el 2021. Esto es algo, lo habitual está entre medio, en lo que pasó entre la Primera Guerra Mundial y la Segunda. Ahora, ¿cómo podía esto haber impactado a los formuladores de política si lo hubieran sabido al tomar la decisión acerca del tamaño del QE durante el COVID? Dos dimensiones importantes que a considerar. Primero, esta serie se produjo hace 2 años atrás. En ese minuto no sabíamos mucho para darle al presidente para que tome su decisión. Entonces, hoy hay un debate sobre el tema. O sea, el ajuste cuantitativo que es necesario hacer. Pero la mayoría de este aumento del balance tenía que ver con la deuda a largo plazo. Y que es clave para el Banco Central, y el tipo de decisiones que se tomaron durante el COVID y las consecuencias hoy. Entonces, mi principal mensaje es que este tipo de gráfico histórico puede ayudar al formulador de política para decir, me están asesorando para que haga esto, el QE, en tantos meses, pero si estoy intentando adivinar el impacto que esto va a tener sobre el balance del Banco Central, entonces tal vez la decisión hubiera sido más informada, mejor. Y no estamos criticando en dimensión alguna lo que ha hecho el Banco Central, simplemente diciendo que los datos, las estadísticas históricas pueden ayudar a informarles al momento de tomar la decisión. Y esto es muy importante porque la estadística histórica puede estar disponible cuando ellos deciden que la necesitan. Y en marzo 2020 queremos tomar ciertas decisiones y entonces el presidente le pregunta al Departamento de Estadística, por lo tanto me dan esta información acerca de cuál era la situación del Banco Central en ese otro momento y nosotros si hacemos este tipo de programa o este otro tipo, ¿qué pasará? Ese es un ejemplo. El segundo ejemplo sobre las bajas de crediticias. Ha habido un gran debate, han habido muchos no pagos y que ayudan al debate. Pero una de las preguntas que debemos hacer hoy como estadísticos es, ¿son estas cosas comparables en el tiempo? Esto lo que han hecho aquí es para ciertos periodos, 10 años, 20 años, y básicamente están poniendo todos los servicios juntos. Y habiendo juntado todo, hacen un análisis. Pero hay una pregunta acerca de la calidad de las encuestas, para darles un ejemplo.
No se discute para nada, porque en el mejor de los casos tenemos un apéndice de los datos de donde han sido tomados, pero no vemos cuán comparable esto puede ser entre países o a través del tiempo, pero podemos adivinar que obviamente qué es lo que va a ocurrir. Es muy importante para la formulación de políticas por un motivo. El primero, y este gráfico lo planteo justamente para mostrarles ese punto, que es un trabajo hecho por el BIS, que todas las crisis, plantea que todas las crisis están correlacionadas con los auges de créditos, pero no todos los auges de crédito llevan a una crisis. Como formulador de políticas, tomamos decisiones con elementos clave del debate que tienen que ver con en qué momento tomamos la decisión de activar una herramienta macroprudencial. Y eso tiene que ver con lo que mencioné anteriormente, porque cualquier estudio que se ha utilizado en los últimos 10 o 20 años fue construido dentro de un marco institucional específico y todos hemos sabido de la intermediación de los bancos. Hay resultados que nosotros no hemos podido plantear con una sólida base por la falta de esa información. Por lo tanto, ¿qué podemos hacer ahora? ¿Qué podemos hacer para poder informar mejor a quienes formulan las políticas? Tenemos que pensar en el síndrome del poste de luz, que tiene que ver con que, bueno, uno tiene una serie de ciertas fuentes existentes, se van acumulando. El Banco Central, bueno, quizás tiene que estar a cargo de eso, no los académicos, como les dije anteriormente, pero uno tiene que ver, por ejemplo, qué problemas tiene ese tipo de planteamiento en cuanto a la comparabilidad y cuán representativo es un grupo de información sobre la población que se está estudiando. Y hay que ver cuando se sacrifica un poco lo que no es exacto o preciso en una serie, con ciertas brechas. Si conocemos las brechas, podemos hacerlo. Eso es algo unidimensional o una de las dimensiones que tiene este problema. Y la otra dimensión tiene que ver con el ser preciso en cuanto a la construcción o elaboración de series de datos, cuando no hay ninguna fuente. Acá hay que hacer un balance entre la precisión y la información y los otros aspectos. Como les mencioné anteriormente, esta base de datos de balance del Banco Central muestra en la línea azul las series que existen. Abajo Estos puntos rojos son los datos de creación del Banco Central. Por lo tanto, hay algunos que han sido hechos por el Banco Central y otros que no. Y podemos ir viendo qué va a pasar con toda esta información. Y después viene la parte de marketing de este tema que tiene que ver con la importancia de los historiadores y los estadísticos, porque tenemos que ser precisos cuando queremos formular políticas mejor informadas, combinando habilidades históricas con habilidades o competencias estadísticas, con una visión histórica o de un historiador, combinándola con el trabajo de un estadístico. Hay obviamente personas que no son estadísticos que pueden trabajar con ellos. Se puede hacer entonces este trabajo híbrido y es fácil de hacer porque antes el enfoque era todo de abajo hacia arriba en la estadística. Los historiadores y estadísticos enfrentamos el mismo problema. Tenemos los mismos obstáculos. Es interesante ver un trabajo histórico en donde uno dice, he estado haciendo este año de estudio de 10 años, pero no puedo reconstruir algo precisamente. Por lo tanto, a veces están estas brechas en donde no hay información generada que se puede usar para formular las políticas. Por lo tanto, es necesario tener series comparables. Estos equipos pueden ser un grupo de personas, puede ser un estadístico que trabaja con un historiador. Y no, me refiero a personas que trabajan con archivos o que van a analizar registros antiguos y que tienen un diálogo con el estadístico para poder así trabajar en conjunto y lograr el gráfico como el que les mostré anteriormente para la tasa de interés, para la transmisión de la política monetaria. El Banco Central trabaja junto con el BIS en temas que a veces están fuera del alcance del Banco Central. A veces esta información no está online. Por ejemplo, en mi Banco Central, la mayoría de las series que yo quiero, a las que quiero acceder en Francia. Hace unos años, por ejemplo, alguien de Berkeley me pidió una serie específica y me preguntó dónde la podía encontrar. Y yo le dije dónde podía estar, pero no estaba esa serie, pero sí estaba el BIS. Por lo tanto, así se pudo llegar a esa información. Por lo tanto, si la serie existe, tenemos que estar conscientes de que esto es de utilidad no solamente para los académicos, sino que también para quienes formulan políticas. ¿Qué pasa a futuro? ¿Cuál es el camino a seguir? Espero haberlos convencido o haberlos hecho reflexionar sobre el tema de que los datos históricos proporcionan orientación para la formulación de políticas en el momento que se toma una decisión. Y las restricciones son que no hay series disponibles, aun cuando existan, o a veces no están hechas sobre un tiempo suficientemente largo. Este es un problema de los bancos centrales o institutos de estadísticas, porque hay que trabajar con series históricas y hay personas que investigan esto, pero a veces toman datos que no han sido evaluados o sobre los cuales no existen metadatos y al final se hace esto con distintas fuentes. Esto es algo en lo que podemos trabajar en conjunto dentro del Banco Central, dentro de la misma institución estadística, para generar esta serie que ya está siendo utilizada por el público. Es una herramienta para que el grupo HMFS del comité Irving Fisher se reúne una vez al año. Yo no soy estadístico, no trabajo con ese grupo HMFS directamente, pero sí contribuyo con el trabajo que ellos hacen. Hay cosas que se pueden ir adaptando en esta fase en la que se está tratando de producir todos estos datos. Nosotros a veces nos planteamos la necesidad de discutir cuestiones metodológicas para diseñar soluciones. ¿Cómo comparamos las series de crédito a largo tiempo? Y a veces no podemos responder eso nosotros solos, tenemos que recurrir a alguien externo para ver qué pasa. Para eso tenemos que tener un marco institucional para poder acceder a este tipo de series. En HMFS también producimos series de datos y documentos disponibles públicamente. También evaluamos las series existentes y trabajamos con el equipo estadístico del BIS para que todo esto esté disponible en línea. Y finalmente, y esta es la fruta más fácil de acceder o el logro más fácil de acceder, tiene que ver con todas esas series de datos que nosotros no queremos publicar porque tenemos miedo que se haga un mal uso de ellas. Pero sabemos igual que hay personas que las están usando, no nuestras series, pero series que están sido elaboradas fuera de nuestro control, sin control de calidad. Por lo tanto, algo que podemos, sobre lo que podemos reflexionar es en tener una parte de los datos que tenga un título de series históricas y que en las que se pueda trabajar en conjunto para hacer cambios. Haciendo disponible esa serie en el sitio web oficial es un bien común que podemos entregarle al público. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Vincent, por una fantástica presentación. Ahora tenemos una segunda presentación. Patty Dume, ella es quien lidera el departamento en el Banco de los Países Bajos. Va a hablar del valor de los datos y estadísticas y la ciencia de datos. Muchas gracias. Es un honor estar ante ustedes para presentarles este tema de aumentar el valor de la información estadística con la ciencia de datos. En este tipo de conferencia, obviamente, todos estamos convencidos de que los datos son importantes para hacer decisiones y también para analizar distintas temáticas. Pero hay una gran cantidad de datos que hemos recopilado desde la crisis global financiera y mi presentación tiene que ver cómo podemos hacer mejor uso de los datos granulares que tenemos ya existentes para aumentar u obtener información para usar en nuestras estadísticas, usando la ciencia de datos. En esta presentación me voy a enfocar obviamente en el clima, porque ya sabemos obviamente la importancia de la crisis climática. Pero antes de pasar a los datos, les cuento un poco de mí misma. Yo trabajé en la División de Estabilidad Financiera del banco y he trabajado en este departamento que es nuevo y ahora estoy a cargo de la seguridad, sostenibilidad y estadística de pagos. Por lo tanto, esta presentación tiene que ver con lo que hice en estos puestos. Cómo mejorar la ciencia de datos y sus técnicas para aumentar el valor de la información y de los datos y las estadísticas. El enfoque principal va a estar en la crisis climática, el riesgo climático. Esto lo hicimos en conjunto con el Banco Central Europeo. Esto está en fase de desarrollo. Especialmente en esta área hay mucho que se puede lograr combinando fuentes externas e internas y aumentando la oportunidad de esos datos. Cuán oportunos son. Como les dije, esta presentación tiene que ver con los datos del Banco Central, cómo los ocupamos desde el punto de vista del equipo de estadísticas financieras y también el de ciencia de datos. Yo quería compartir un poco cómo se ha organizado toda esta labor, porque nuestro objetivo tiene que ver con todo, recursos humanos, riesgos y colegas que a veces quizás no están tan conscientes de este tema de la ciencia de datos. Los ayudamos a incorporar esto en sus labores. Y después, las estadísticas financieras sostenibles. Esto es algo nuevo, relativamente nuevo. En conjunto con el Banco Central Europeo, nos comprometimos a producir esa información, indicadores estadísticos sobre el carbón y el carbono y también otros indicadores que tienen que ver con la crisis climática. Acá usamos fuentes públicas y existentes. Entonces, estas estadísticas cuentan con esta información que tengo acá, con los indicadores del carbono. Esto obviamente es importante para las empresas y sus carteras de inversiones. En ciertos casos sabemos cuáles son las emisiones de carbono. Y si combinamos la información de todas estas fuentes, podemos calcular cuál va a ser la intensidad para cada institución. Y para eso combinamos la información financiera, que puede ser la de las emisiones de carbono o no.
También trabajamos en los indicadores del riesgo fiscal. Y esto es mucho más un riesgo físico. Entonces, ¿cuán seguros son las empresas en cuanto a estos riesgos como inundaciones o tormentas? Y también está la cartera de exposición de las instituciones financieras y las vinculamos con el resto de la cartera, todas las exposiciones, para poder ver cuán estable es la cartera para las instituciones financieras en términos de los escenarios climáticos. En mi presentación hago una distinción, 3 partes del proceso, caracterizado aquí para las estadísticas financieras sostenibles, pero creo que estos pasos también son relevantes para el proceso estadístico, si estamos pensando en productos estadísticos. Entonces hay mucho valor en combinar datos internos. Tenemos muchos datos granulares en este momento, especialmente en Europa, desde la crisis, los mercados de dinero, las estadísticas, etcétera, y todo lo que se ha mencionado ya hasta aquí. Pero hay mucho valor en combinar todos estos datos. No es tan fácil, como les voy a mostrar más adelante, pero también enriquecerlos, porque el valor de los datos que uno tiene aumenta si uno lo puede vincular a otros recursos. Y yo creo que hay ejemplos muy buenos de esto, como el Banque de France, y cómo ellos utilizan datos satelitales para predecir o ver la evolución o predecir la producción industrial. Pero hay mucho más a ser ganado de esto. Y el último, la expansión. Yo creo que fue también en la presentación anterior, donde vivimos en un mundo muy rápido y también estoy a cargo del equipo de los valores y tuvimos hace poco una solicitud y un periodista me contó algo sobre la cartera de las empresas financieras y sus tenencias en términos de valores. Pero entonces tener los datos granulares de ese tipo es muy bueno. Hay que trabajar en esto. Entonces, partamos con la combinación. Entonces, como se ha dicho, es necesario combinar los productos estadísticos para la compilación de nuestros indicadores de finanzas sostenibles. Debemos combinar los datos granulares y las tenencias de las distintas instituciones. Pero también había un proyecto de análisis donde profundizamos la interconexión con el resto del sistema financiero, así las estadísticas. Y creo que combinar estas fuentes granulares les da visiones muy valiosas, porque aprendimos de la crisis financiera que es necesario ver la imagen completa. No es solamente tema de ver una institución financiera, ver el lado macro. Pero hay algunos desafíos y los principales son que tenemos datos granulares, pero indicadores o identificadores únicos no los tenemos. Y hay que tener en cuenta diferentes fuentes de datos granulares. Entonces, ¿qué hicimos nosotros con estas estadísticas de finanzas sostenibles? Y esta es otra parte, es el riesgo físico, porque si tenemos datos muy buenos del IPR, EPRTR, European Pollutant Release and Transfer Register, y tenemos información crítica acerca de las instituciones financieras. Pero calzar los datos no fue tan fácil, o combinar los datos no fue tan fácil por coincidencia. Pero lo que nosotros hicimos fue tener un proceso mucho más rico. Primero, si por ejemplo tienen dos conjuntos de datos y el Banco Central de Holanda, o tienen 50 versiones de los datos, también lo vemos. Bueno, primero pueden ver representaciones y hacer aproximaciones por similitud. Es una forma de hacer coincidir los nombres, los datos. Pero eso no hace el trabajo completo, porque igual quedan con algunas coincidencias potenciales que no se realizan. Entonces también hay un poco de otros algoritmos de coincidencia y nosotros los combinamos y combinamos con el machine learning, el aprendizaje de las máquinas, y para ver si es una coincidencia real o no. Y ahora hemos capacitado el algoritmo de la máquina para hacer la combinación de las distintas coincidencias. Y la buena noticia es, este es otro ejemplo, de cómo un mismo nombre puede ser escrito o deletreado de modo distinto. Y se publicó este paquete. Es de uso libre. Y se puede aplicar a muchos más conjuntos de datos. Y eso es lo que se hace en la institución. El segundo, el enriquecimiento. Bueno, como ya les he explicado, como Banco Central, uno tiene muchos datos. Pueden enriquecer los datos combinándolos con datos externos. Un ejemplo es el mellizo digital. Y esto es algo que, bueno, no es algo que el banco haya hecho por su cuenta, sino que también se hizo en Hong Kong y Francia. Y aquí nos centramos en la exposición e intentamos mapear la exposición de los desarrollos inmobiliarios con los eventos climáticos. Bueno, creo que el proyecto ha ido bastante bien, porque también estamos cooperando con el Data Science Hub del BPI. Y es bueno utilizar estas visualizaciones, porque uno puede ver fácilmente qué escenarios específicos, qué es lo que hacen, lo que generan. Pero si uno quiere utilizar los datos externos, lo que frecuentemente hemos visto en la institución es que muchos colegas en el banco utilizan datos externos y no solamente piensen en los datos alternativos más exóticos, sino que acerca de la inflación y que se recopila del Banco Mundial, del FMI. Y lo que se hizo fue que muchos colegas recopilan estos datos en forma manual de la misma o a veces fuentes distintas y lo utilizan. No es una situación ideal, porque de hecho quieren asegurarse de que si dentro de una institución están utilizando estos datos de inflación, y es mucho más eficiente. Por lo tanto, la situación ideal está por el lado derecho, en que los datos son recopilados en forma central de distintas fuentes externas y como colegas dentro de la institución tenemos acceso inmediato a los mismos datos de inflación, por ejemplo. Y por supuesto que con restricciones y limitado por la confidencialidad. Entonces, esto se utiliza como un paquete interno y a veces es necesario rescatar datos de un área más restringida. Hay algunas áreas restringidas, pero también esto es posible. Y creo que también tenemos un código para los datos disponibles a todos los colegas del Banco Central Europeo. Bien, entonces eso fue. Tenemos combinación, enriquecimiento y el tercero es la expansión. ¿Por qué? Para la producción de las estadísticas de finanzas sostenibles, como les dije anteriormente, nosotros nos confiamos en datos estadísticos existentes, pero también las fuentes públicas. Y estos son obtenidos de los estados anuales o datos comerciales, pero especialmente las emisiones de carbono, publicados con un cierto rezago. Y por supuesto que nosotros lo que queremos es tener estadísticas oportunas acerca de cuán sólidas son las instituciones en relación a escenarios específicos y los riesgos de transición de las distintas carteras. Entonces ahora estamos trabajando en un método de outcasting para la producción de estadística de finanzas sostenibles. Porque tenemos datos. Tenemos las distintas posiciones de las instituciones financieras, pero para otros hay, como ya les he dicho, llega con bastante rezago. Y actualmente estamos trabajando en esto y lo que vemos es que el Rocky, la forma en que la intensidad, digamos, igual esto es trabajo en curso, pero lo que ven aquí, nosotros no hacemos el pronóstico en base a datos cualquiera, sino que son ingresos, emisiones del indicador WACI y que arroja resultados plausibles. Y de luego, al final, lo que ven allí, estamos trabajando en esto, un trabajo en curso, poniendo las clasificaciones de riesgo en el modelo de predicción y parece que es un muy buen predictor de la trayectoria posible de una empresa a futuro. Entonces, yo espero haberles mostrado que la utilización de técnicas un poco más avanzadas de los datos, como de ciencias de datos, el machine learning, o sea, el aprendizaje de las máquinas y demás, que tiene un gran potencial para los procesos estadísticos. Y yo creo que lo que es de mayor valor aquí es que esto se hace por nuestra cuenta, internamente, dentro de la organización. Yo creo que vamos a tener beneficios de tener un trabajo con la ciencia de datos y trabajando en forma colaborativa con externos y también con colegas internamente, con las herramientas existentes, y que tenemos los expertos de los departamentos de estadísticas para compartir el conocimiento. Y que ellos también puedan aprender de los colegas de ciencia de datos. Y yo creo que nosotros estamos en una posición ideal a fin de combinar los datos internos que tenemos con otros datos provenientes del público, de lo externo, para generar estas visiones. Y como les he mostrado, que ahora utilizamos esto, el aprendizaje de máquina, para fines específicos. Pero hay mucho a ser ganado con identificadores claros, algunos que se utilizan a nivel mundial, tienen mucho potencial, pero aún no estamos ahí para poder cumplir o sobreponernos a todos los desafíos que también enfrentamos. Las técnicas que les he mostrado combinan estos datos expandidos y también se pueden utilizar para la estadística. El costeo, por ejemplo, no es solamente para las estadísticas de sostenibles, sino que otro tipo de datos también. Y yo creo que tenemos muchísimos proyectos con gran valor y también un potencial para aplicarlo a otros procesos estadísticos. Mucho más es posible. Y yo creo que, bueno, hace poco tiempo atrás estaba haciendo un proyecto con un colega del equipo gerencial y dijimos que, bueno, a veces se utiliza un solo punto de datos que tiene más valor, mucho más que 10 o más combinados. Entonces, pero en general hay tanta información disponible y que uno puede combinar y enriquecer y expandir. Entonces, creo que esto es el último. Sí, simplemente las estadísticas financieras sostenibles son muy claras para los colegas europeos aquí y hay cooperación con el Banco Central Europeo, pero si a ustedes les interesa proyectos de parte del grupo de Data Science o Ciencia de Datos, aquí hay informes anuales que pueden revisar.
Entonces esto realmente es el fin. Muchísimas gracias por una excelente presentación.
I think that I'm going to have a couple of questions for you later. So now we have, as Vincent mentioned before, our own, I call him an statistician, you call it before, no? So we have our own econ statistician, José Díaz. He is professor of economics at Instituto de Economía from Universidad Católica. He is an expert. He has been working in Chile in the generation of data, historical data, and he's going to talk about how data has guided economic decisions throughout history. José, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you all for this invitation to speak. I shall present in Spanish, thanks to the nice team of translators. My Spanish is bad, but trust me, you don't want to listen my English. So, la presentación que...
The presentation I would like to share with you basically will provide an overview of some results and reflections. It's a bit disorganized, which also leads to some food for thought. And I hope that any historians and statistics experts will use all of this information to actually, think about and speak about all of these matters. One of the objectives is showing you some cases in which data has been used for the Chilean audience. These cases are pretty well known. They have studied them at school, and I will show you how that has been enhanced with much more information. So I will use those cases to reflect upon how public policy was discussed back then and what we learned, and see the takeaways from that. And there's an objective at the end, and I hope I remember it, or otherwise you remind me at the end. The first note, just at the beginning, as has been already mentioned by the other speakers, our country has a very important tradition in the gathering and compilation of statistics from the 19th century. The central bank, it's already 100 years old, has done a great task, job, but the National Institute of Statistics is even before that. And thanks to the fact that people back then thought that it was so important to gather information of all types, demographics, commercial, trade information, is that we had a good basis to be able to build everything retrospectively. I'm not saying that the database is perfect, because it is not, but we do have a starting point. I was talking to Graciela Marquez, who's from the Mexican Institute. We have the first approach of GDP for the 19th century. I was one of the ones that put that together, and probably it's wrong. But there's nothing similar for Mexico or Colombia, for example. So what I am trying to say is that there's a good basis to be a sort of historian and statistics expert at the same time that can help us in this dimension. The first case, Chile before the central bank. Of course, you know what happened before the bank was created. Just as any other republics, before we organized ourselves politically, the whole money issue was difficult to solve because we came from the Spanish regime. We had to try to organize our monetary system. I don't want to bore you with the details, but many initiatives came up to first see what we were doing. One is from 1851, to try to use only one currency, which was the peso, a unit of account. And in 1860, the first General Banking Act or law, which was very rare because it was a free banking act that came to an end in 1878. And then there were two periods of inconvertibility until the central bank was created in 1925. Now, what did we know back then? Well, not much, to be honest, not much in some dimensions. This is the inflation rate estimates. Those are the averages by decade. The consumer price index began to be calculated in 1928. So before that, all we have is guesstimates, very honest guesstimates, but guesstimates in the end. And some of them are based on information. For instance, when we came up with the consumer baskets of the convents, you know, we used those baskets to try to come up with the consumer price index for that moment in history. But that interest rate, that inflation rate, is have similar levels as to what we saw in the 20th century. And it's not very different from what we have in other experiences. But what we do know and what is measured is how much our currency was worth and the exchange rate. And this is the way it was measured back then. It was pennies for pesos. And this is very interesting. We were at 48 pennies per peso. And so you see there's devaluation, depreciation, loss of value of currency until the Central Bank of Chile was created. And as you know, when it was created, it was established that the Chilean peso had to be worth 6 pennies. So that's from 48 to 6, and that is shown there on the graph. So what happened with the banks? Well, very quickly, the banks were created, legal banks, except for some crisis periods. This, in the 19th century, we had already 25 banks at the end. I was reading in the subway on the way here, the CMF now supervises 18 banks. So we used to have more. But there were two large banks that were the ones that were the most prominent back then. One was the National Bank of Chile, and the other one was the Valparaiso Bank. And between those, they had about 50% of the deposits, and very similar to the loans. Where did we get that information? Well, it was public information from some public records, statistical records, banking records. The Edwards Bank was relatively small, and then at the end, we can see it became a little more relevant. So what we wanted to know was about the loans. It was very complex because there's lots of banking information that was destroyed in 10 years, every 10 years. That's the way it was done back then. This is by Cesar Ross. He tried to do something with this, but there were a lot of contracts from the notary publics where we don't really have a clear idea about the destination of the loan. So this requires further work, evidently, or other sources of information. But we do know the time that the loans were made. Most of them, the time they were 1 year, 2 year loans of these banks, the long-term type of loans. So that gives us food for thought. There were some banks that gave longer loans, but they were housing loans. Case number 2, just to leave the monetary field for a bit, drinking water and sewage. I have a son who's almost 20 years old, and when I tell him that 90 or 100% of urban population now has drinking water and sewage, and he asks me since then, when? And I say at the age of the 90s. And he says, oh, that was in the past. It's way back in Roman times to him. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is underrated, the great effort that had to be made to bring this about. And the original motivation for this was health-related, which is very similar to what happens in the U.S., where they had a problem with infant mortality. I will show you the causes for that later. But then what they thought was of creating infrastructure for drinking water and sewage. And this is from the Ministry of the Interior, 1863, when the budget was discussed to build the sewage system. The Ministry of the Interior said that is not under our purview. That's what they said. This has to be done by somebody else. And maybe they got rid of that Ministry of the Interior. But then what happened from the 80s on, they began with the first interventions that required information. What cities would be assigned priority, because the resources had to be prioritized. So cities with over 5,000 or 10,000 inhabitants, and which cities are those? Where do people live in Chile? And that required information. These are the mortality rates in Chile and birth and mortality rates. Mortality seems to be on the rise, but it's probably something that maybe it's not very clear in the report, but there was high mortality rates. And what were the leading causes of death in the 70s? Apologies for the graph, but most of them from infectious diseases. That was the leading cause of mortality. And below, and in those we had typhus, dysentery diseases, pneumonia, fever, and the death was mostly in the infant population and children. And so they had to establish the urban population. That was an important point. We have a census every 10 years since the 19th century. Once again, we may discuss about the quality, but they are there. They can be reviewed and corrected every 10 years. It required a great effort to actually do that. And the blue line shows the urban population according to each census. But the problem is that the definition changed over time. So sometimes what was urban was not urban in the next census. The red line is an exercise done by a colleague of mine by the name of Wagner. He said, let's take the cities, the most populated ones, the 50 most populated cities in the country in every point in time, and we'll calculate what percentage of the total population is equivalent to that. So with that, we got about 50% in 1960. Only in 1960, we saw that there was 50% of the population lived in those populated cities. So they began to determine the sewage system and the drinking water network. This is by provinces in Chile. When we talk about data, sometimes we think, okay, we'll work with data from Santiago. But Santiago is not the whole country. It's not the whole of Chile. That's an interesting point. Maybe the new technologies would allow us to actually, look at regional data to be able to address regional issues. This is from the 1980s until the 1980s. We have the coverage of drinking water and sewage systems. And this is the last stage where we have about 90% of coverage. As you will know, once this mission ended, the sanitation companies became privatized and then went on to another phase. Case number 3, which is very well known, is the nitrate crisis. It's well known after the war. There's a typo there. It should say nitrate there, not copper. So we controlled basically the whole north because we had the nitrate actually production, and then this was required for fertilizers. And Peru had a lot of success with animal-sourced fertilizers from bird droppings. And we had a very rich mineral deposit producing nitrate. And what's interesting about this is what our country did with the nitrate.
Instead of in Bolivia, Peru, the original idea was to create a state-owned company to produce nitrate, but that did not happen in Chile. What Chile did was to have the private sector to get the nitrate, but to apply part of the income, they applied a tax to exports. It's very interesting. So private sector produces, but I charge you a tax for what you export. And thanks to this, we have very good records of fiscal revenues because they wrote everything down, didn't miss anything. And also the movements here. So that is most striking, that the Chilean state consolidated its financing sources via external taxation. Before that, Chile was financed by charging a tax on imports, not because they wanted to protect the sector, but because it was necessary to finance itself. So now the export tax, so that domestic taxation in Chile, yes, they did exist, but they were not really relevant in terms of fiscal revenues. And this will change with the First World War. That was a major discussion. Nitrate still extended until the Great Depression, but the fact that the fiscal revenues was depending on the sector was not so attractive at the time, and so that led to the creation of new domestic taxation. Small mental note. The 20s are of great change in the Chilean economic policy. Not only the central bank appeared, but also this discussion to change fiscal revenues. And how important was nitrate for the rest of the world? Well, there are estimates. This is measured as nitrate 60-70% of the world's supply in the 19th century. And we lost market share in the following decades, and that is another data that was interesting. We didn't know that there was synthetic nitrate. We did not know that we had alternatives. Yes, this was known since 1910. There was an engineer, Alejandro Beltran, saying, look, there is this alternative. It is functional. It's a bit high cost, but it's on the way, and we did nothing. Nothing. It's not that it took us by surprise. No. we were there, standing still. And so that with 80% of our exports at the time was based on nitrate. And so here we have the revenues. This is as a percentage of total revenues, and you can see how the weight of domestic taxation dropped off. Some people really like this graph because it looks like a mouth is wide open, swallowing everything. And that is in fact what happened. Now, that led to a discussion to reform the Chilean tax system. Then income tax came along, the first version of income tax, and modifications to the domestic taxation, which has followed course until to date. Here we have imports, yellow is nitrate, and this began to lose weight because the domestic taxation increased, income tax, VAT, and so on. So all of that discussion that occurred in 1920 with this phenomenon. Now, very quickly, the last case, which is far better known, the case of copper, as you can see, well, everyone knows how relevant copper is to the Chilean economy. But what I'd like to say here, and to go wrapping up, is that we did not know anything about copper in the early 1900s, only until 1950. Did we produce copper in the 19th century? Yes, but that was lost at some point and was recovered when U.S. companies came to exploit low-grade copper with little technology. But until the 50s, we really didn't know much about copper, and there were a lot of issues. And so there was a first initiative, was the Copper Corporation, to try to understand what was going on. The big doubt at the time was whether these U.S. companies were or not investing. That was the discussion at the time. So here we have Chilean copper production. This was the 19th century. In the 19th century, we had almost 40% of the world copper production was high grade. But that was depleted, and then afterwards the grade was coming down. But with good new technologies, it's still very profitable. And so this represents copper exports, and almost 60 and around 70. If to that you add nitrate, this is the explanation of Chilean trade in the 19th and 20th century, these two products. And the other side of history, apart from understanding what was going on, and with this I will end, is whether the policies at the time would or not end up in some sort of indemnization. And Chileans know there was a major discussion in this regard because they calculated the indemnization, but they discounted excessive profits, a calculation that it was never very clear where it came from, but led to much trouble. And at the end of the day, that was not paid, and what was normal was paid out. And I apologize for taking a bit longer. These are just a few things. I had a hidden aim that I will reveal now. If I showed you this picture, they said, look, isn't it good? I could think of this has led me to ask another question. Great, that's the idea. This is ongoing work. It is not yet concluded, and we need to get into asking new questions and getting new information. The logo of the conference is Data for a Smart World, and I would say data for a better world. That is President Alessandri in the 1930s. And who's walking next to him? His child that was going to be also the president in this century. Unthinkable, but true. Thank you very much, Jose, for your excellent presentation.
So now we have Remigio Echeverría, Deputy Director, General Statistics, European Central Bank, who's going to talk about granular data, a giant leap for decision making at the ECB. Remigio, floor is yours.
Sí, buenos días a todos y muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this session, and Gloria for once again bringing me to Chile. I will speak in English because after José's presentation, I've now forgotten what it is to speak in Spanish. Just one thing. And now I was thinking of, should I talk of the history and the present? And the ECB goes back just 20 years. So you talk about the history. It's incredible the advantage the Chilean central bank has.
One element that was in Bert's presentation this morning. He said about central banking is about getting data to do better or critical decision making. And this is something I would like to stress very much. We don't produce statistics at the ECB for the fun of getting data to the IMF, to Bert or to Bruno in the BIS. That's very important. I'm not saying it's not very important, but that's not why we are collecting or producing our data. Our data are produced so that Madame Lagarde and previously Draghi or Trichet were able to make the right monetary policy decisions and to guide the euro economy and the citizens of Europe where they belong. So that's something I think we should stress and not forget. I hope. Oops. Here. Yeah, here. And this is the pointer. Pointer. We don't have pointer here? Okay, good. Anyway. Okay, then, so what is important to, or what I would like then to come in is to explain how the global crisis, and I think Paddy was alluding to that in her presentation, how this enacted as a game changer in the ECB as to the statistical toolkit that was needed to help the monetary policy decision making at the bank and to make sure that the ECB could continue the governors to make the right decisions. And here it's basically in two areas where we have found out after the crisis that we were lacking information. One was we didn't have information on credit risk and also market risk, and for that we have developed some statistics that now help us to manage also that risk and to help out in the process. Moreover, in these 25 years of short history of the European Central Bank, we have not only been responsible for monetary policy, but recently we have enlarged our list of responsibilities to also cover banking supervision and financial stability. And that has triggered also more need for granular data because those areas, credit risk and market risk, are very critical if one wants to maintain them properly. So in this context, so it's very important that the support of the critical decision makings for the ECB Governing Council are sustained also by giving the ECB a lot of legal power. So the ECB, different to maybe other central banks, has the power to collect statistics, legal power to collect statistics. And for that reason, we have to also make sure that, that we are keen on getting all the data that we need to make the decisions, but also being very much concerned and cautious about the reporting burden we impose on the different reporting agents, mainly on banks. But from there, we are, from banks and the financial institutions, we are entitled to get all the information that we need in order to manage our policies. So, in terms of history, I will just before the crisis. So if the ECB, as I said, started in 1999. If we take the first years of the monetary union until we had the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, that was with Lehman, was falling in 2008. There you see how inflation was relatively easy to manage. So the inflation target of the ECB is 2%. So our monetary policy has to ensure that our inflation target is around the 2% in the medium term. And this was relatively easy to manage. And during this period, our monetary policy implementation was relatively easy. So we only needed we managed it in the traditional way or orthodox way, if you want. We only needed to have our weekly auctions for liquidity to the banks. The banks will tell us how much we calculate how much was the structural liquidity deficit in the banking system, usually caused by what's called autonomous factors, usually banks in circulation and government deposits. And with that, we were giving in our weekly auctions to the banks the liquidity they would need it. So all was very easy to steer that our policy rate was reflected in the market rates at which the banks were trading. So this is the situation as was at the time. And therefore, we were, let's say, easily monitoring the situation. But now, in these conditions, what is important is you don't need so many statistics to manage the implementation of monetary policy. You only need statistics or data to make the decisions on monetary policy. The decision is what is your official rate at the bank. You decrease, you increase the rate because you see, I don't know, inflation is growing, or you have, for those who have also the GDP in the decision making, you then meet in the governors every 6 weeks and you decide, oh, we need to decide to lower the rates or increase the rates. And then you decide what you do with the official rates. That's decision of the rates, but that's not about implementation. Then you have to make sure that in the markets really the official rate is the one that's traded. Otherwise you have problems of the fragmentation. So, but in those, let's say, the all good days, we only needed information for decision making. Then the so-called traditional macroeconomic statistics were very sufficient in these early 10 years of monetary union. So we were looking at the monetary aggregates, basically the growth of M3. Statistics very much loved by Bruno. He's not now in the room, but he's a fan of that. And then, of course, we developed a bit later on the integrated financial and non-financial accounts for the euro area. This we were calling the second pillar. So there what we were looking is at the money holding sector, so the household sectors and the non-financial corporations, what were their consumption, saving and investments, and that helped us to see whether we need to increase the rates, we need to decrease the rates, and then from there we move. Also balance of payments to see whether we were having external shocks that would allow us or force us to do some let's say, intervention or some decisions in terms of monetary policy. So that's the situation by now. But then, with the crisis, everything changed. In 2008, of course, we had the crisis created by the subprime base. You may remember that this was a total collapse on the normal functioning of the money markets. There was, of course, the mistrust in these asset-backed securities that were so popular. And this was because there were intransparent portfolios behind that, so you didn't know what was the quality of the loans beyond. So the ABS had a AAA, but then the loans were very poor, what was sustaining this. Then we had a bit later on, more or less 2012 in Europe, the sovereign debt crisis. So the rating agencies started to decrease very quickly the rating of our government debt. You know that in Europe we do not have a fiscal union, we have a monetary union, but not a fiscal union. So every government in the area, we are 20, has its own sovereign debt and has to maintain a certain credit for that. And then, of course, this was creating, you may remember the Greek case, whether Greece was going to leave the euro or not. There was this discussion at the time. And then, of course, there was the liquidity crisis a bit later on, the COVID crisis, where, of course, there was limitations to the movements of persons and goods and so on that created also a lot of stress in the market. And more recently also in 2022, the supply and demand shocks also linked to the Ukraine crisis, energy and food. There was no shipping industry moving around and so on and so forth. So that was showing us very clearly that from there on, the only problem was not just to decide on which rates we wanted, but also to make sure that the implementation of the monetary policy was really moving in the direction we wanted, and that we wouldn't have, 6 governors meeting every 6 weeks deciding on a rate, but the market then trading a different rate, so that you have different costs for the companies across the different countries in Europe. So that made us very clear that we needed to increase our toolkit, and basically what we needed in order to, let's say, provide an answer or to be more efficient in responding or helping this to make sure that we do a proper monetary policy implementation was to go for data sets that cannot be just extension, new breakdowns on the balance of payments or new breakdowns on the financial accounts. We needed a different kind of information. We needed information that was coming much more quicker, not real time, but daily, at least in some cases, certainly monthly. And then it must be more granular. Granular, why? In order to capture fragmentation, so whether the problems were having problems in companies or in countries or in sectors, so not just deciding about the euro area as a whole. Also to anticipate contagion, so whether somebody is having a problem, whether this will spill over to others. We had now responsibilities for financial stability, and then of course also information to design and monitor what was going to happen in the money markets. For that we started first to collect information on the, or develop new data sets that will provide us with information on credit risk, because what were the questions that we were getting in 2008 and in statistics when Mr. Trichet, at that time I remember, was calling us, we didn't have an answer, and that was very embarrassing. Question he had was, oh, Lehman Brothers is collapsing, what will be my losses? The losses of the European Central Bank, or the Eurosystem, if you want to take the older central bank says. Oh, that was a very difficult information. We didn't have the information by now, so we had to identify what were the icing codes for Lehman Brothers securities traded in the market, how much of that we have, how much of that will be the money that we are losing. Other questions there were, well, what you see here, if a company is falling down, or you know, if Credit Suisse fails, for example, who is it? Which are the banks that is Banco Santander going to collapse if this Credit Suisse is falling or not, or by how much, or what is the total exposure by the countries, by the banks, by the sectors? So all these sort of questions we were not able to answer. There was also a question I put in the example United Airlines, but you may remember Evergrande is a Chinese, I think, real estate developer that was falling. We got the question, oh, how much is then the exposure to Evergrande in our banks, in our system? Is it going to create a spillover? Are we going to have really big problems? Do we have to then do something in the system? Here, more sort of the question. So also in the monetary policy area, it's not no longer, as I said, the decision, fine. It's just we decide to lower rates. But how do we make that, if we want to then have a problem because we are going to inject a lot of money in the bank in order to support the liquidity, but if the banks do not have collateral, we need to enlarge our list of collateral. If we want to accept, for example, loans as collateral, do we have a list of loans? Do we have a register of loans, or don't we have it? And then we cannot implement any of these. Or if we want to give the money, but they give the money in different conditions to the banks that will translate it into new loans to small companies or medium companies or big companies, do I find this in my banking statistic? No. You don't have this breakdown in the banking statistic, and it's rightly so, because otherwise it will be too complex to ask the banks to provide this information in an aggregate manner. So all these questions we were not able to answer, so not very good for statisticians. So we developed then this system, and I think the acronyms Patty was already using in her presentation. I will not use the acronyms here, but basically what we built is databases that collect basically all the information on the loan by loan, information of all the, let's say loan by loan, all the loans that banks have given to legal companies in Europe. We register that. On the securities, we have both the total let's say, security by security issuances that are traded and managed in the euro area, and also on the holding side, all the holdings by sector and by banking group, who is holding the securities that are issued. And then, of course, a register was called RIAD, was mentioned there, where we have all the details for the companies that are located. So we have information about the size of the company, the direction of the company, so you can then do physical risk calculations whatsoever. You have even whether it's the parent company or the mother company, so that you can have group exposures in total. And these will link through the different identifiers. For example, you have an issue of security, you know the ISIN and who is the issuer, and for that you go here. You know then if it's issued by a large enterprise or by a smaller enterprise, and then you connect it with the loans. You see whether that company has also loans or not, and with banks. So you make a complete closing of the circle for that. This closing of the circle then provide us now the quick answers that we needed. So if Lehman Brothers collapsed, now we will be able to tell when Credit Suisse, and this is not a non-real example, Credit Suisse, we got the question and we were able to answer in half an hour to Ms. Lagarde, don't worry, the exposure is small, even if it falls, there's no big banks affected and we will not be damaged, when these 81s of the Credit Suisse were at stake. Also in Banco Popular, a Spanish bank, was also in difficulties, to say the least. Then we saw that a significant proportion of the debt was held by the Spanish households, and then we thought better to make a solution whereby another bank buys it as a resolution rather than let the bank completely fall, and then a lot of, let's say, Spanish poor households will lose all the investment because nobody is going to give back the money they have in bonds issued by Banco Popular. And this database is just a screenshot, and I will not extend very much, but here it's very easy. It's a very user-friendly information. We have even presented it to Ms. Lagarde. So even for that level, you only need to type the name of the bank or the name of the company, and then you get all the information. What are the debt that the company has issued? Who are the creditors? Who is the banking groups that are owning the securities? You have even a small map where it tells you already who are the most exposed, and so on and so forth. So very rich information that I'm not going to enter into detail, but it's very also easy to handle. And then, of course, for very much important uses of that we have is that, of course, you see here from 1998 to 2008, very easy monetary policy management through a corridor, lower bound, and our monetary policy rate was close to the yellow line, so that was the official policy rate, and then we were monitoring that everything was there. Then, of course, after the crisis, the banks were in trouble, nobody trading in the money markets, nobody borrows any bank money in the money market, and then the ECB have to come to the rescue by injecting money. First, in this first year, we did it basically with refinancing operations, long-term refinancing operations, and then even 3 years operations, which were floating the liquidity. And then, of course, it's the blue line then, what has become from 2008 our policy rate. So the official policy rate is not the main refinancing operations, the yellow line, but the blue line, the deposit facility, which is the lower bound that we have set by putting a lot of more liquidity that is needed because the banks otherwise would not trade themselves in the markets because there were doubts about whether if I borrow money to the other bank will go give me the money the day after. And in that respect, of course, this required then in 2017, and then later with the crisis, you see the block in gray is this huge increase in asset purchases, the famous quantitative easing that somebody was alluding to, where this also required information about what we were doing in these all scenarios. And with that information that we have now, we can help the process of implementing. First, let me go to the graph on the left very quickly. This tells you we are able to know how much of the total bonds circulating are in the hands of the central banks of the euro area. And then you see that even in the peak, when we were doing a lot of asset purchases, we managed to even buy or have in our portfolio 40%. So 40% of the total bonds circulating in the euro area, government bonds, were held in the portfolio of the central banks. This is huge. You create then tensions in the repo market because, of course, if all the government bonds, which are the basic for the repo market, are in the hands of the central government, then you create tensions in the money markets. And moreover, you also have the problem that you are forbidding the banks in order to get money from the central bank, they need to bring government bonds in order to guarantee the operation. If there's a scarcity of bonds, because all the bonds are already in the hands of the central bank, you need to increase the portfolio of the securities or assets that you allow as eligible for monetary policy operations. Thanks to AnaCredit, we could add the credit, the loans, the credit claims as collateral that the banks can bring also in order to get funding from the ECB. So that was then possible because of the information in AnaCredit. And during the long refinancing operations that we were including there, as said before, we were able to help them by permitting the board has asked us, can we do different terms and conditions in the borrowing in the long refinancing operations to the banks if the new loans are given to small or medium enterprises? That we couldn't do with the banking statistics backed with AnaCredit, we could. And we said, yes, the board, you can establish different rates so that when the funding goes to small and medium enterprises, they can get maybe penalized lower in the cost, and then the operation was more beneficial for them, and we were supporting more. This means that now we are having a discussion about what will be the future mix of the policy in the ECB, whether we will have lending operations, asset purchases. Asset purchases was more or less an anathema for many years, but now with the quantitative easing has ceased to be a case for that. And we are discussing now what will be the way to liquidity, asset operations or lending. And this is something we are reflecting, but we have now the, let's say from the statistical side, all the data that we need in order to support the implementation. Also, maybe another example I'll try to run because I know I'm a bit overdone with the time, but I think it's still interesting that at least we go through that. During the dry down of the markets in 2008, when Lehman collapsed and the crisis started, we also had a lot of other problems, fragmentation, banks were not borrowing to each other, then the cost of the financing of banks in different jurisdictions, even though we have a single monetary policy, was different, and this is something the ECB cannot afford, because if we have a monetary policy, financing cost must be same or relatively aligned across all the euro area. And then we also said that we had to do something in that area. Here what we did is to start to collect information from the money markets, the repo market, and the derivatives data. So these statistics say that it's a collection of information, daily information that we collect from all money market segments from 74 major banks in the euro area. And then we have two complementary collections. So for the secure, for the repo, and for the swaps and overnight, we have these two other collections where we collect with 3 days delay all the transactions. So not just from the 74 major banks, but from all the participants in the market. This has also permitted us to answer information of the type of, see what's going in the markets. For example, you see in the markets very clearly, I don't know what's the case in Chile, maybe you were not affected, but in Europe, certainly the repo market has been growing enormously since the financial crisis, and the unsecured market, where the people borrow money without any collateral in exchange, has been declining. And also we see that there's a concentration in the markets in the short-term terms, so more in the overnight transactions. Also, with the information of the daily markets, it permitted us to construct, when the LIBOR crisis came and our rate at that time, Eonia, which was the rate, the benchmark rate that we were monitoring as our short-term benchmark, was declining. We were able to create our own substitute, Esther, which entered into force in 2019. So from there you can see the green line is how we steer the rates. As I said before, for a central bank, what is important is not just to decide in a rate and sit down in the sofa and wait what happens. No, you have to make sure that the short-term rates in the market are following the policy rate that you're establishing. Otherwise, you're done as a central banker. And there you see how, exactly as I said in the beginning, we have the corridor system where the rate that we were fixing was the yellow line, the main refinancing operations rate. And then Eonia was following it nicely. Then, of course, the crisis came. The bank floods with liquidity through fixed allotment, full rate, all the money the banks needed, so a demand-driven force. So we asked the banks how much money you need, demand, and then we give you all the money. Then we went to a lower bound where the blue line, the deposit facility rate, became our reference rate, but still we need to monitor that the green line, in that case now the Esther, is nicely aligned to it. Then when we flooded it with the asset quality purchases, as from 2015, more or less, and then with the pandemic where we started to buy massively securities, we moved to what is called a supply-driven force. So it's no longer that we ask the banks how much liquidity they want, but it's that we decide how many assets we purchase, and we put all this money in the system to flow the liquidity. And the future system, as I said, may follow one or the other. Here, just also another pieces of information where we can see from the information that we have now very granular, whether there's exactly, this is the spread between our policy official rate and the Euro short-term rate, so the markets in the market, so we can monitor whether there are peaks, and then that gives us a signal, okay, maybe there's fragmentation, maybe there's something going on, we need to intervene. Or in the repo market, because unfortunately the Euro area, the Eurozone has not a fiscal union and has not a safe asset as such, you have the repo to be traded against the government securities of each of the countries. And then you see that the financing cost of the operations depends very much whether you're bringing German collateral or Spanish collateral or French collateral. Not now, I think now the gap is closing, but there have been cases during the crisis when this happens. And this is a problem because, of course, you have a monetary union, but what happens if your companies in your country need to be financed at much higher cost than the companies in a neighboring country? This is not something the ECB would like to see. And the OIS also help us. The OIS is the overnight index swap. This we have daily information and allows us, we have found out that this is the best predictor of what the market thinks the ECB is going to do with the rates. So you can see in the OIS what the market is thinking, how you will take the decisions on interest rate. It's nothing that then we need to follow it, but at least it's good to know when you take a decision whether you're going to surprise the market or whether the market is prepared. And these things I think are important to evaluate before you get everybody by surprise, and you may create also an unintentional shock on that. That's it. I think I know I've gone a bit over time. Sorry for that. In the future, what we are going is we are going to move more in this direction of granular. So we are going to collect now granular data on loans from the banks, not only for legal companies, as we have now, but also for natural persons. We will take even more attributes in every loan, so information also on commercial real estate or for sustainability purposes. And also the future, as we see it, that is that we try to then produce the aggregate statistics more and more from our adding up granular data. I think this is the future, permits also to integrate the collection on, or maybe decommission information that is collected in supervisory grounds, because if you have all the loans provided by the banks, you can compute both statistical indicators but also supervisory indicators, and then maybe with that we can even relieve the banks from some cost. Sorry for the rush, and I hope it was clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Remigio, for an excellent presentation. Now we have some time for questions from the audience, so I'm going to open the floor for questions. Sir, over there. Do you have the microphone? So we are going to take 2 or 3 questions, and then we're going to give you time for it.
Thank you very much, Chair, and for the presenters. 4, as I would say, very interesting, intriguing, but different presentations. So very quickly, in terms of generating long-term, historical, consistent, smooth, coherent time series, that's a challenge, that sentence. So for the 2 characters who did the presentations in generating that historical data, what is the single most challenge that you faced? So for example, these international standards, they change the scope, their coverage, evaluations, etc. What is the single most challenge that you had in generating consistent long-run data? Secondly, in the absence of the single identifier, which has been a discussion for many a year, wish we'd have that, it would make many lives easier. And we've created an industry whereby people are doing a huge amount of data linking, data matching across different data sets. What would make your life easier if there wasn't a single identifier? What else could make your life easier? And then finally, and this is the one that I found more intriguing about the present, past and future. So the ECB, you've had many challenges along the journey, as you've said. We've got lots of granular data in place. We have whom-to-whom accounts. We know there's massive debt mountains in households, corporates and government, not just across Europe, but also across the world, and especially in a big country across in North America, that debt mounting clock just carries on and on and on, and we have to add more digits to it. So with all this data and lessons learned with the past crises, and you're trying to future-proof the management of risk, just before lunch, can you tell us, with all this information, where do you see the next crisis to come from? Because you've got all this data. Tell us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the panelists. My name is Matthias Osandon from Sembla. Very interesting discussion. So I had a question more specific to Patty. We work a lot with all our members, central banks. We have 51 central bank members on topics related to data science, and something we have come to realize recently is that in the intention to incorporate data science across business units of a central bank, you phrase more and more what we call internally organizational silos. This is different than a data silo. So data is more available, that's good, right? Silos are going down. But then you see that sometimes you have a mid-level manager maybe in one specific unit, and that guy is not that willing to incorporate data science into his unit, and this produces some frictions, right? When you try to incorporate all across your business units initiatives like the ones you were showing. So the question I had is whether you have been seeing that the hub, in the case of the DNB, has been playing a role in facilitating how units that maybe are not so prone to incorporate data science in their activities use it more actively, and how you have been facing those frictions. It will be interesting to hear your experience. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go with the questions and then
thank you for the question on the main challenge. In fact, I will answer with two challenges. But the first is convincing policymakers that there is useful information in historical series. And I hope that I convince those in the room about that. Now this leads to two, let's say, organizational challenges. The first is, how do we create, let's say, within central banks, but in connection with academia, an ecosystem that is able to have this kind of statistician working together? So that's the first thing, and that must come from policymakers. By policymaker, I mean senior policymaker. But the second one, and that is why an ecosystem is important, is that data, as my colleague already said, are already there. So it's not an issue about mining, let's say, deeply into the ground to find the data. It's about organizing the work and then having the people, listing the requirements of the series, and then thinking about the risk about linking the data. But it's clear for the balance sheet data that I show that it's something that is kind of easy. Credit aggregate, and my colleague spoke about before the central bank period. It's something that can also be done. So the question is, political will, be some resources, but not that much. It's not a question about having 100 of people per central bank. It's a question of having sometimes. I already told you, communication, it's part of, let's say, it's 10% of my time devoted to that. So there is no thing about, France having find a solution. It's much more a policymaker needs that need to be addressed by the staff.
Yes, thanks. So I think two questions are pointed to Mai. The first one was about a unique identifier. So how can, if there was a unique identifier, how would that make your life easier? I think that was the question. Well, I think it's for example, with the sustainable finance statistics, why we want to combine Riyadh with the pollution data is that the one data set is only containing headquarter information. But if you have headquarter information, then, for example, a company invests in a big supermarket chain. Well, the chain may be located in the capital city of a country, But that does not give you at all a good picture of how the risks are spread once that company, once there will be floods and the company has a lot of like supermarkets in a certain area that will be attacked by the floods. So if you have those identifiers in an ideal world, you can easily merge those data sets and the quality of your data and of the insights, it's just much more valuable because it provides a much better picture of where the actual risks are. And then the second question regarding the data science hub. So, well, of course, it's a huge challenge because we were setting up this department and we wanted to be demand-driven. So in an ideal situation, colleagues come to you, oh, well, there is this data science hub and I want to do some data science. And well, I think there were a few challenges. So first, the colleagues who came to us, for example, colleagues working in supervision, but always used to look at their data in Excel, for example. Yes, Patty, I want to apply machine learning and I have this Excel. And you think, okay, well, so there is also a huge knowledge gap. So they don't know exactly what is possible, what is data science, what can we do. But on the other hand, it's also in the organization. So we were really happy that people were coming to us. But I think I showed we now have 70 data science projects. Well, not all of those 70 projects are pure data science. Sometimes a project was just started to give other colleagues an idea of what we can do in, for example, I think you have to distinguish optimization, so like automation, so putting things out of Excel and write a Python code for it, and innovation. And I think we really, with the setting up the data science hub, we want to focus on the innovation side. But first, we really had to convince people, and that all started with the automatization. So getting people out of Excel and show them that there is much more possible if you just use code, and that's not real data science, but it was needed to confirm parts of the bank, like, okay, first we have to do this step, and then we can talk about innovation. And then you also have, of course, the management level, because sometimes colleagues are coming to you, that's nice. Some departments were like a bit hesitant, but it was also, we have had huge discussions with like senior management and the board. Like actually, we at the Dutch Central Bank have our strategic plan for the coming years, and then each division, so supervision, financial markets, has its own strategic plan based on that. And actually, you want them to include in every strategic plan, in every management layer, that there is an ambition to become more data-driven. I think that's the only way you can force people to really transform and to really apply data science. But I think everything you mentioned, I recognize it a lot. There were some huge challenges we faced over the years, so, and it takes time.
Yes, whether the data, the massive amount of granular data will prevent us a crisis or will tell us where the next crisis is coming, I think it's possibly too much to ask. I also don't think that the granular data are designed for that. They may give you some hints, but it's not the main purpose. I think the main purpose is to be sure that first that we learn from the past, so that the areas where we have seen problems can mount up, we need to have an answer and we need to be prepared, and mainly to create sufficient quick and available data to provide a quick answer to these questions. Not so much maybe what will be the next question or the next provoker of a crisis, because who could imagine Russia would invade Ukraine, or who could imagine the COVID would be happening. These shocks sometimes are completely unpreventable, but the quick question where the granular data must play a role is, if that happens, what? If this happens, tell me, how much are we losing? Tell me which banks will need help. Tell me where I would need to, if I can design a new unorthodox monetary policy operation, be it as a quality management or long-term refinancing operation, 3 years, 1 year, 2 years, can I structure like that? Can I structure this other manner? There is where I think the granular data can help. And of course, then You can also see things in the granular data. For example, you can see what's the total exposure, so you can already start to identify that a bank may be mounting at too much exposure against a given sector if that sector collapses. So that may give you hints where the shoot will be coming from, but it's not the main purpose. But the main purpose is to get the quick answer to the right question that happens when the crisis is happening or almost to happen.
Well, I switched to Spanish again.
At a moment where we have data science and AI facilitating lots of research processes, a point I would like to convey is that what we must not disregard collective intelligence. That means that there's nothing healthier than when we do research for us to test them in the real scenario in academia and to get all the criticisms and be willing to accept that we might be wrong. That is valuable, particularly if we are building figures for the past. Of course, we need to continue doing that. And I also encourage you to do a past cast, not only the forecast, the past cast, to look back and see what happened back in history, to gather the information from those who preceded us and to see what worked and learn from them, and then help us prevent many things in the future. Thank you, Jose.
More questions? Okay, so this has been a great, and we have no more time. This has been a great session. Just thought about that. So, as you can see, I'm not from your work, but as you can see is that in the last few years we have seen a significant increase in knowledge. We can call it the new technologies, okay? And what are critical aspects, especially for developing economies, is technology diffusion. The ability that these countries have in order to adapt this knowledge, these new technologies. And I think that there is a very significant gap in many countries regarding the ability to generate data, statistics of high quality for policy making. And I think that that is crucial. And so I think that you are expert, you are at the frontier. So, but I think that it's also important to do a reflection regarding how can you, at the end of the day, generate some changes, generate some more impulse for these topics to be in the political agenda, in the agenda of the countries, in the allocation of resources, because I think it's very important for welfare. So I think that I think that one thing that is critical is that people have to understand how important it is to understand the past, the present, and also to have an idea of where the future is going to be, because otherwise the gaps between countries are going to be significant. And I think that statistics on all that we are doing, it can play a significant role reducing those gaps. So I think that that is an invitation for institutions such as the IMF to put this type of discussion at the center of the discussion, also with the countries in which they're visiting. So we talk about the current account deficit, we talk about inflation targeting, but I think that it's also important to talk about how important this dimension is in order to improve the welfare of the country. So thank you very much again for your excellent presentations. So we have
Well, thank you very much to our presenters and to our chair, Luis Felipe. We invite you for lunch in the adjoining room and ask you to be back at 2:30 for the second session. Thank you.